Mics are live.
Awesome.
Hey there, and welcome to Cover Cover. We're getting started a little late tonight. I am KCT92. This is a new show we are starting in which we are looking at independent game designers, artists, and
We're getting
creators
started a little late tonight. I am
from
KCT. This is a new show.
kind of. I'm hearing myself double. I'll figure that out later.
We're getting started a little late.
But we're looking at independent artists, creators, designers, all those kind of great things who make the tabletop gaming community work.
Independent.
Other than Wizards, who I love Wizards, but there's so many other great creators. If everybody's stuck at home, it's a great time to explore some new games, some new options, and I'm just bringing people on to talk. Last week we looked at Zweihander, which I have links for on my Twitter. Hey, you should go check it out. It's a great game, and their books are on sale right now, I believe. Today we're going to talk to a friend of mine who I used to live with for quite some time. He has been running a Patreon, making his own content for quite a while. Fantastic artist as well. So let me at this point introduce my good friend Reuben Kendall. Hi, Reuben. There we are. How are you doing tonight, Reuben?
Yeah.
Oh, is that where that's coming from?
There we are. Yeah, I'm. How are you doing tonight, Ruben? Good. I am.
Oh, is that where
that's
coming from?
Yeah, I'm getting feedback because I need to mute my. There we go. Got it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, like I said, Reuben and I lived together in college for some years, for like 3-ish years almost.
Yeah, about
at the University of Tennessee at Martin in West Tennessee. You probably don't know anything about West Tennessee, and that's because there's nothing to know.
Yeah, accurate.
I loved University of Tennessee, and there was actually quite the gaming community there that I did not take part in because I discovered tabletop games a little late, which I often regret. But Ruben, why don't you, instead of me talking about you, why don't you talk about you?
Oh yeah, sure. I met you in college, and oh gosh, it's like now that I open my mouth, I'm like, let's get sucked back into the abyss of time and go back.
We won't waste too much time with that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah, right. Okay, everybody.
I guess more. Yeah, tell me what kind of stuff you're up to. Ruben is a graduate of Covenant Seminary College
Yeah, I just
in
finished
St.
up there
Louis,
getting sociology degree from a bunch of Presbyterians.
where he currently is.
Yeah, so I did that, and I'm in St. Louis now. I lived my whole life in Tennessee, moving around all over the place. So, military family, it ends up being like that.
Your
And
hometown was a little famous for a minute for not great things recently.
really, what happened?
Yeah. The parade got boycotted by the downtown churches.
Yes, I know. I do know about this.
Yeah, I saw it in a couple like national news sites. I was like, I wonder if Ruben knows about this.
I saw that. That's like the last news out of my hometown that I like probably have actually heard, but excepting coronavirus.
Unless you, yeah.
But yeah. No. So I lived in Tennessee, but then I moved up to St. Louis to get a cultural studies degree, sociology degree, and it's good. It's good here. I'm like about the right distance from hometown. About 4 hours away, so it's a one-day drive, but it's also a no surprise visits kind of drive. And I've been getting into tabletop RPGs and game design and stuff more since being up here than I was in Tennessee. So I was introduced to really D&D through a couple of friends that Casey and I also roomed with, Charles. And he introduced me to the world of 3.5 through Neverwinter Nights, the game, and then did online game sessions through a former multiplayer server through that. So I actually learned D&D online first, and then got into the tabletop version and game design version of it once I moved up to St. Louis. So
I think that was actually I didn't start playing actual tabletop games until my last year of college. I don't like using senior year for like using
Yeah.
those terms for college
Yeah.
seems weird to me. But I did my first instance of D&D as a game was a D&D based computer game. We played Ruben and I and our friend Charles as well quite a bit of the Neverwinter Nights City of Arabelle server.
Yeah.
One of the last bastions of that game is an online community, and we had characters. We had just finished. My friend Ruben here is a theater kid, just like me. We had just finished a production of A Comedy of Errors by William Shakespeare, which is about two sets of twins. And so we named our characters after our twins, Dromio and Dromio. And we
Yeah.
would, when I logged out, he would log in and be like, "I'm looking for my twin brother, Dromio," and we would coordinate it so that we were never in the server at the same time.
Man, I'd forgotten all about that.
You
Like
would like,
that was
yeah,
fun.
you would walk
That
into
was
the
super
tavern and
fun.
be like, "Have you seen Dromio? He owes me a loot or something like that." I don't remember. It
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous.
Well, D&D is inherently ridiculous, which is
Yeah.
what's great about it.
I need to get Charles on here to talk. I wonder if he ever finished his National Root Beer Registry.
He found the Holy Grail. He did find the one that he's been looking for all these years. That's the last I've been in touch with him. I was in touch with him sometime last year, and he had found that, which is good. Um, but yeah, he's also working on another project right now. He finished his thesis, I believe, and it's like social dynamics, cultural dynamics. We actually, weirdly, Charles and I ended up going into similar like academic fields, which is, I mean, I guess we were both in the sciences, and Martin. I just didn't think of myself as being in the sciences because I was doing art that last year.
Hmm.
But yeah,
But so what's your experience, Ruben? I know a good bit of it, but what's your experience in tabletop gaming? Like, tell me kind of what you like, what your taste is.
yeah. So we started the first tabletop campaign I started was fifth edition, and that was with friends from seminary. So I made friends. I moved into an apartment on campus and never made any friends with anybody in that apartment building. And then I moved out of that building and then became friends with all of the people in that building and then came back to that building to play D&D. So there was like this year long turnaround. And the first campaign I ever played was a super short, like, we started it, we never actually got to the real campaign, and we never finished the real campaign. But that was in fifth edition. And so while I had already played 3.5 on a digital server, on an online server, I had never played like with my own dice, learning the modifiers and everything myself. So I played a bard because I had always played bards and got into that game. And then once we got that one up and running, I played a couple more campaigns, short campaigns. They were kind of all structured around the school year because we were playing with students and friends of students who were coming in who also had work schedules and stuff. So,
That's a
um,
topic of an upcoming stream, by the way. How what we'll put a pin in that, but I'd like to talk about that then too, because I find like teachers and student groups to be really interesting.
yeah, yeah, it was a really cool group because you don't, it seems like a lot of things in life kind of sort you into groups where you're around other people that share your exact same life experience. And then academia is weird because even though you're all sharing the experience of study and academics, you're all in totally different programs. And especially in grad school, when you are in different programs, you're doing such different stuff that you're not working in the same places, you're not living in the same places, and everybody's of different ages. Some people are just getting out of college. Some people didn't even go to college. Um, some people are like they've been out of school for 30 years or something like that, and so you get a much more eclectic group of people. And I think that's kind of true with any academic group. But anyhow, yeah, pin in that. Um, I'm like now getting super sidetracked. Pin in that, but we started a couple campaigns, and then while still in school, we did a campaign in the Dragonlance world.
Oh, really?
Yeah, And that was super, super fun. And I think that we kind of hybridized Dragonlance and then just the Forgotten Realms 5th edition standard world. But just breaking into that world, and that was just for the practicality of things like spells and class feats and stuff like that. So we borrowed, for some of the players, for some of us, we were playing characters that, like, pretty near transfer. But that was so cool. The Dragonlance campaign was so cool. And then a year after that, a couple of my friends got their hands on an original second edition rule book, the rule book. And then this last year, I got the first edition,
I mean,
uh, you know, rules cyclopedia. So the Dungeons and Dragons cyclopedia of rules, which was super cool to look at. And so I haven't actually played any of the earlier edition games, but I've spent the last year and a half now looking through that and kind of using that to motivate the way that I think about, or influence the way that I think about the evolution of the game and the way that it's changed, where it came from. And so, like, how to dig into world building and spell building and stuff like that for the content that I'm creating.
it sounds like you came in kind of the opposite of me. When I started, I had a little bit of experience with our guest last week, Mark. We played a short campaign in college, in that last year of college, and it was very fun. And then I immediately moved back to my hometown of Clarksville, Tennessee. There are no trains right now, social distancing, guys. No last train to Clarksville. It's already come and gone.
Yeah.
So supposedly this is the town from that song. We also boast that Jimi Hendrix was stationed here when he was in the Army for that short time that he was in the Army. And we're
Oh yeah,
home
because
to,
y'all are a military town. Yeah.
and we're home to Gomer Pyle's drill sergeant, or not Gomer Pyle, Ernest's drill sergeant from Ernest joins the Army. Um, yeah, right. But anyways, I moved back home and started working at a local museum. It was a combination art and history museum, and I was just like the guy who did all the things like cleaning up and setting and hanging paintings and all that. And then the facilities manager I worked for was a good guy, and we got to be friends. And he's like, I have a bunch of friends that want to start playing D&D, but we don't have anyone to run a game. And I was like, I'm an English teacher and theater student. I can play. And he was like, fine, but you're gonna have to run the game. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of jumped straight into DMing and GMing with little experience as a player, and we basically made things up as we went. It sounds like if you were playing a Dragonlance campaign, I'm guessing that you had someone that knew what they were doing.
So that's the fun thing. That's the fun thing. It was, and so, yeah, I definitely came in as a player, and but I think that the game that I came in at was my friend Adam's first or second campaign that he'd ever DM'd, that he'd been the DM or the GM for. So he was kind of putting his feet into the water of DMing, and it was like the iconic D&D situation where you're like, we all want to play the game, but none of us have ever done this before.
So you buy a communal set of books and learn.
Right. Everybody helps pitch in for the books, and then we just kind of draw straws or do volunteer based, who wants to try to handle this first. And so we found a super easy, super simple campaign, made it through 2 weeks of that, and then half of our party couldn't show up anymore because they had a work schedule change, and it was like a small party, and then somebody else, like, their evening class kicked in or something, and so it was another couple of months before we could play again. But about the third time, so not counting that first 2-week set of sessions, which was maybe 3 sessions in all, we had done probably 2 mini campaigns that each lasted within a month to a 3 months, like a semester kind of period of time. And by the time that we finished with that, I also was helping DM, because the Dragonlance was probably the second one we did. Maybe it was the third one. I'm not sure. It was within that first year of starting, and it became very obvious to me in the course of that game that I wanted to control the story. I didn't just want to control my character. I wanted to control the story, and I was not the only person at the table that wanted to do that. So
that was me. I like playing and I like being a player, but there's
Yeah.
something special to me about making a world and making all these NPCs and stories and giving them to the players. Like I'm like, give
Yeah.
me backstories and I will rebound off of them and make cool things for you. That's what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and so I basically hashed out a campaign with Adam. He and I, and he, so Adam and Cherie were the couple at whose apartment I first started to play. And they had taken turns DMing. Cherie had tried to DM, but they also had little bitty kids at the time. So that this was 5 years ago or 4 years ago that we started. So they had a 1 year old and they had a 1 year old and then I think a 4 year old or something like that. I can't remember how old their third kid is. But it was one of those situations where they had to learn to take turns DMing just because of like whose turn it
Mm-hmm.
was to go send the kids to bed and stuff like that, or if the little bitties woke up in the night. Um, so we started doing creative content and just spitballing ideas. And then Adam and I developed a campaign that we kind of co-ran together after the the infamous Dragonlance campaign.
How does
Like that.
co-DMing work for you? Like I've never done that. Like does that work well?
So you have to figure out it's different. So I've now co-DM'd with three different people, and you have to figure out a balance and figure out what each person wants from the game and wants as the DM. So I did a really fun campaign that I missed a session of a campaign that's going on in Ireland right now with the guy that I ran this campaign with. It was the last year that we were on campus together. Um, a friend of mine, he lives in Ireland now, and I made a campaign that was based off of like Gaelic mythology, Irish mythology. And the way that we ran together was he took over narrative and I took over monsters. And so we just had this back and forth passing the torch where he would take the players through the narrative parts of the story, the role play, the scene setting, and stuff like that. And then when it came time for combat, he would basically kind of sit back and engage with the players. He was like the player interface for the guiding them through the process of initiative and combat and roles and stuff like that because we had a lot of new players. And while he was doing that, which was a pretty full-time job, it was a big party. I ran all of the mechanics behind the scenes, so I was the one who was doing all of the dice rolling and stuff like that, and was relaying that to him. And that method does not work with some people. That's not one you have to really shutter yourself into your specific roles because there were times when he needed an NPC and then I would be that NPC and I would play that NPC, which was always super fun. But like I also had to like be careful not to
Mm-hmm.
adjust like things that he had done as the DM, controlling
Yeah.
NPCs that he was controlling. Because we came up with the content together, and so the immortal salmon of knowledge would like rise out of the stream and tell somebody, this, that, or the other thing. And then as a DM, if you're going to be trading off like roles, you can't basically step on each other's toes, which is always the challenging part.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So when did you make the jump to designer and what made you want to do that?
Well, right off the bat, right? So, like, as soon as you get into the world of tabletop games and role playing games, there's like all this stuff that's been imagined,
Mm-hmm.
and it's irresistible. Like you have to ask yourself, why was it done this way? And especially when you look back at the older editions and you see the changes that have happened through the game.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really interesting because there's a really great series of roundtables with Matt Colville, Matthew Mercer, and Adam Coble and a couple other people. That's like a famous GM roundtable. And if you're familiar with them, they are all very different but very skilled like game writers and designers and game like runners. Matt Colville in particular is a great designer, and Matthew Mercer's getting into that. But they kind of talked about like there's an inevitability almost to
Yeah.
once you start GMing to want to like tinker, and then
Mm-hmm.
like there's a certain subsect of people that immediately want to get their hands in that and
Yeah.
start making
Yeah.
things. There really is an inevitability to just being like, well, that doesn't quite. I can do something that works here,
Yeah, and
And
there's always
people
that
like
like the
you,
what if,
yeah,
that what if that everybody wants to, because I think that one of the really cool things, especially about fifth edition, is that when you get into the world, like so much of the charm and the like allure of D&D specifically is like getting to tell your own story and getting to create your own
hmm,
character, and that creative spark. Everybody has that creative spark, and some people have like a little bit, and they like that initial hit of just like, oh, I get to pick my character's name, like, oh, that's
yeah,
cool. Like that satisfies them. And then you have people who kind of really want to get into backstory, and they want to maybe come up with their own weapons and fighting styles and things like that. And then you have people who are like, the whole game, give me the whole game, like I want to make my whole game.
I was like, I think the moment for me was when I started map making. And I really need to link this resource. I don't know if you just draw your maps from hand. I
I
tried,
do. It's
but I had
terrible.
been so long out of a design. Like I used to could do art. I can't anymore. I have forgotten it. I'm working on getting it back. But there are great programs. My favorite of which is Inkscape, which is a free online map making tool that lets you just like sculpt and draw and use little map markers that are already pre-generated, and it's like the best thing ever. And I went in there and I made a country and I started naming the cities, and then I would go through and I would put bullet points and I'd be like, taverns in this city.
Mhm.
This tavern's owned by a nice old gnomish woman, whose favorite thing is to make cinnamon bread in the morning because
Yeah,
the tenants always wake up happy when they smell cinnamon bread. And I was like, I love this, and they're
yeah,
never
yeah,
gonna run into this old woman or care about her, but I care about her.
yeah. That's what got me. So like, I think that the first thing that really broke open the dam, and it ended up turning into the campaign that Adam and I ran together, uh, was we were talking about some. There had been like an element of mystery or problem solving in the campaign that we had been doing,
Hmm.
and there was like we were saying like, how do you build a mystery, like how do you build an interesting mystery when the answers are already predetermined and you can't actually have your play, like if your players actually have to solve the actual riddle, to find the ancient forgotten artifact, your players may never finish the campaign. you
Yeah,
know
right.
if their characters have to solve the riddle, then maybe their characters can have a flash of insight from their cleric, but how do you create a compelling mystery story where you're having to discover things and put clues together that is structured enough that you can't mess it up, like
Hmm.
you can't lose the lead and not catch the bad guy,
Yeah.
but is open enough that you can actually still experience that feeling of
Hmm.
we're solving problems. There's questions
Yeah.
that are being answered here, and that was what busted it open for us, because we started making relationships. We started
Hmm.
making connections between people, and
Yeah.
so this was the Lord Protector of the city's wife, and then this was
Hmm.
his secret life, and then here was this old lady and who sold flowers, and then across the shop from her was this gnome who sold
Hmm.
wine, and like as the characters started to develop, it just turned into this entire story
Hmm.
that we ended up running, which was really fun.
I know for
Um,
me, a lot of it. I joke all the time and say I mentioned that we both did theater in college. I've been
mhm.
doing theater since middle school. I've
Yeah.
done a little bit of summer stock, like quote unquote professional theater, where I was paid, so it counts as professional. But I miss doing theater, and in the quote unquote real world, I just don't have time right now. And
Yeah,
while that's
because
something I'm working on,
it's huge.
D and D and tabletop gaming scratches that itch as a player of like acting, and then DMing also gets that like script writing itch, and I get to paint
Mhm.
minis and I get to make maps and all the
Yeah.
things that I just don't have time to do in a more structured setting.
Yeah.
And
There's
so
a
like
lot. Yeah.
I had to dive into as many of the hobbies as I could pretty quickly,
Yeah.
and it scratches a lot of those itches. But for you, you've started turning that into a I don't want to say a too much of a profit, maybe, but or
Yeah.
that's not the way to say it. But
Yeah.
you've turned it into a thing that you can do for more than just. just a hobby, I guess, or a little
Yeah.
bit more.
Um, yeah, how to say it? Because like I feel like there are definitely people who do take world building
Mhm.
and game building and turn it into like their career.
Yeah, I would say professional, but I don't think you would want me to call it professional game
Yeah, because
designing.
I don't feel like it's professional as much as it is um like structured or something like that. Like I went on to Patreon when I was having like issues
Mm. Does
while
it
trying to finish. Yeah.
does it
So
just like goad you into doing it? Maybe I know with me, if I say I'm going to post something online, I'm more likely to actually work on it.
yeah, a big part of it is like incentivizing myself, motivating myself. So to actually have like accountability to other people
Hmm.
and a schedule where I'm producing it. But a big part of it too was like basically respecting my own creative process and kind of getting to a place where I'm getting farther and farther away from doing theater. You know, I haven't done theater in a long time,
Hmm.
and I have, you know, I was losing a lot of my engagement in the arts.
Hmm.
So I was still writing. I ended up my thesis kind of project, my capstone project for my degree ended up being poetry. Like I ended up writing a
Hmm.
book for that, but like that was kind of a new field that I was branching out into, and my own like pure raw creative world building, character concepts, you know, game design, art, all of those things. I was kind of moving away from, and I basically wanted to make space to respect that, you know, and
Hmm.
intentionally make room for that in my life. And so a lot of the things that I've found like keep me from doing art and stuff like that is the self-talk. It's like the, you know, I don't have time for that. I
Hmm.
don't have, you know, room for that. I'm never going to finish that. I don't want to start something that I can't finish.
Hmm.
And so for me, it turned into a like a place where I was like, wait a minute, what is a pace? Like, what is a
Hmm.
project that I can do incrementally?
Hmm.
And if I can find a project that I can complete incrementally, that's going to draw on and demand that I use like my artistic skills and my creative talents that I'm kind of letting shrivel up and die. If I can find a project I can work on incrementally, then all I have to do is say I can do the next step, right? I
Hmm.
can take the next step, I can do the next bit. And at that point, I had been fiddling around with, you know, creature design. I had designed most of the creatures for the Irish mythology campaign I mentioned earlier, with the help of my friend Scott.
Hmm.
And so I had done enough of that that I said, wait a minute, you know, something that's always frustrated me about like the D&D monster manual is that there are not plant-based monsters, that the monsters don't reflect the environment very well. You have dungeon-based monsters and then you have non-dungeon-based monsters, and some of those are aquatic and some of those are Feywild, but in general it's really hard to build a monster encounter that fits the environment of the place that you're in, that gives your characters a strong sense of place. And there are monsters in the book that like are desert monsters, or they are, you know, again, ocean monsters, or they're forest monsters, but they're not coherently organized in that way. You have to go through the lore and find out the lore on every single monster and then
Hmm.
go and port them yourself into monsters that you would find in a swamp, monsters that you would find in a jungle.
Hmm.
um,
I wish the book was organized more that way. I
yeah, I do
get
too.
I get the alphabetical makes sense. That's fine. That's fair. But and there is in the back in the index there is a chart for that.
Yeah,
But I like the idea of focused smaller publications. And I get why Wizards can't do that, but I think that's a
right.
great place for burgeoning designers to jump in and make their mark.
Well, yeah, because I don't really get why wizards can't. Because I'm like, all it takes is an appendix or like a glossary.
Hmm.
Like, because they do, you can find like those appendices or glossaries and tables in the back where
Yeah.
it's like, you know, these are creatures that might serve a blue dragon that lives in the desert,
Hmm.
or you know, these are forest kinds of encounters and stuff like that. But like, it seems like it would be such a simple jump to like just publish a simple like guide to the biomes of Faerun, the Forgotten
Yeah,
Realm,
that'd be
or
interesting.
right. So that was something that had been eating away at my mind as I was trying to build these compelling, encounters with monsters that I had designed in
Mm-hmm.
my own campaigns. And so I was like, okay, wait. So this is something that I'm interested in. And if I can say once a month I could create a new monster,
Mm-hmm.
and then all I have to do is pick a discrete number of monsters and say, then I'm going to do a project. I'm going to publish one of these a month until I've published a certain number of monsters. And that is a way to hold to my guns, like to kind of stick to my ground and
Mm-hmm.
make space for my own art. And then it holds me accountable to the people that I'm publishing it to. And so, yeah, like I don't know if I would say it was like professional as much as it is. Yeah, there's not a word for yeah, there's not a word for that in between space where it's not really the way that I make my money. Although currently, because of coronavirus, it is the only way that I make my money. Um, like everything else is shut down. Patreon is still open. So yeah, bring in that
I think I read online for algorithm purposes, we can't use the C word for the most part.
yeah,
I think we have to
mm,
refer to it in general terms. I don't
yeah,
care, but the internet seems to, from what I
yeah. I
understand.
don't. I've noticed on Patreon and like Instagram, a lot of creator pages, there's a lot of like hashtags and stuff that have come up about the virus.
Hmm.
And I'm like, part of it has to be just a timestamp, there it's like, this
Hmm.
is what's happening while we're all, socially quarantined and stuff. But I haven't used those because I'm like, on the one hand,
Let's call it. Let's come up with a. We need a name. I'm gonna call it the
yeah,
Great Grounding because we're all grounded. Stay in
yeah,
your
we're
rooms.
all, I've got friends calling it Miss Rona up here.
I'm gonna go with the Great Grounding.
The great ground.
Yeah,
I've been calling it the crow
the Crow.
because of COVID sounds like Corvid. So
I've been enjoying referring to. We had a conversation with a group on a random group text or chat thread about what to call this extra money coming in, and we went between plague pennies, uh, Donald dollars. I finally settled on Rona rebates.
ooh, I like Ron Rebates. That's good.
Uh,
Yeah, I like the Donald Dollars is like immediately evokes a duck though. Like it
I mean,
immediately evokes Donald Duck.
I
I,
mean that's who I'm
I
referring to. Twitch algorithms. I'm definitely talking about Donald Duck.
yeah, this is a Kingdom Hearts fan.
I am a huge Kingdom
Right?
Hearts fan, and
This is
eventually
what
I
we do.
am going to have someone in here.
Yeah.
I'm going to have someone in here who did a large scale Disney campaign
Ooh,
for their
that's
high school students. That's an upcoming stream that I'm really excited about that you will enjoy. My friend Linda Detweiler is a high school teacher in Hopkinsville, Tennessee, Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Christian County,
mm-hmm.
and she started a D&D club at her school that now has like over 50
Oh,
people, and they have to break up into different games.
yeah.
But
Because you
originally,
can't manage 50 people in one game. You can
no.
manage 10. I actually, right, the first thing before we did the Patreon, before I got the Patreon up and running, one of the guys that I did D&D with started a domain. He bought a URL or copyrighted it. Started a blog, WordPress blog. And we basically just started posting like DM advice, things as we were learning stuff. And one of them was about like, how do you deal with that? Like, there's that magic jump when you're above 6 people. Like, 6 people is a perfectly normal party. Like, it's a big party, you got a lot of people to deal with, but it's perfectly
Mhm.
normal. Somehow, between the sixth and the seventh person, you
Yeah.
just go off the deep end and you're
which
in total
which is
chaos.
why
And
which is
like,
why she's had to break these kids up. But like it's awesome because she's told me like behavior's been better at their school. Kids are staying after school for hours to play D&D or just
yeah,
Jenga or something. They started incorporating other games. She's got people from around the country to send her bulk Magic cards, so the kids
that's good.
can make Magic the Gathering decks. And if they spend an hour organizing the cards, they can build a deck with the stock that's in the room.
That's good.
Yeah, and like it's just become this awesome program. She's actually going to like various education conferences around the country to talk about it. And she's
Yeah.
going to be on a stream in a couple months to talk about that, and I'm really excited for that one.
Yeah,
Um,
that does sound really good. That's like, yeah, and that's another like major side trail that I can get easily
yeah,
sidetracked when it's talking
but
about like
we're talking
education.
about designing and the internet. And
Yes.
we've spent a long time introducing ourselves. So let's get into. We're here to talk about Ruben. My friend Ruben here, the Rook half of the Rook and the
Look at.
Fox on Patreon, is designing an Herbarium, an all plant monster man. All plants and plant monsters. I don't want to just say plant monsters because I feel like some of them aren't monsters. They're just plants.
Yeah, so the project is plant monsters, right?
Hmm.
But you're right. There, as I've designed them, I'm kind of like the problem that I have with plant-based monsters in the monster manual is that almost all of them try to be a monster so hard that they lose
Hmm.
any resemblance to a plant.
The
And so you
Shambling
have
Mound, I
like,
think, is a good example. It is
yeah,
vegetation that was struck by magic lightning to become a monster.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, like yeah, and like I don't know, like some of it is some like there's something D&D about like just the super outlandish,
Yeah.
ridiculous origin story of monsters. But like when half, and I'm serious about the half, when half of the plant monsters in the monster manual are like myconid warrior variants, that's not a monster. That's a goblin. That's just a goblin that's made out of mushroom so that you can call it a plant.
Mm,
And it doesn't really have, it has some weird spore based abilities,
yeah.
but it doesn't have anything that would not be out of place, for like a goblin a caster,
Yeah.
a shapeshifter, or a
I
spellcaster, or something like that. Yeah.
And the same can be said about things like treants. And
Yeah.
maybe that's because I'm such a Tolkien fan and I talk about Tolkien a lot on here. But the
Hmm.
treants aren't plant people.
They're
They
not.
just look like it, but it specifically says we are not trees.
Mm-mm. They're not trees, and they are giants.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell
So
you, I'm curious. I'll tell you mine if you tell me yours. What is the best official rules plant monster in your mind?
not including mushrooms or including fungi.
Including fungi.
I'm not going to include them anyway because I hate them all in the principle. So um, I don't. I would say. I mean, I would say the shambling mound, just because even though it's kind of the laziest of all plant monsters, where it's like, oh, a mound of plants gained movement speed. It can eat you. It is also the most, I don't know. To me, the Shambling Mound is it's super iconic. It's super
Hmm.
old, and it has unusual abilities that change the game that you're used to dealing with when it comes to other monsters. And that to me is the difference between the plant and the animal kingdom. So the fact that the Shambling Mound regenerates hit points if it gets struck by lightning, that it can't be electrocuted. It's
Yeah.
grounded. It can't be electrocuted.
Is that the
And then yeah.
yeah? We should also mention Ruben does have some expertise with herbology and biology. That was your major in
And that's what I
undergrad,
studied. That's what I
and
studied in
you
undergrad. Yeah.
spent a lot of time in that greenhouse and you taught labs for the biology department, so you do know about plants.
The Boston fern, the lowly Boston fern, is actually a plant monster. It is actually a plant monster. People are like, I got a new plant for my house. It's a Boston fern, and I'm like, kill it with Clorox now, or it will
Does
kill you when you
did that
sleep.
influence one of your monsters?
Not yet. I should design my next monster should be the Boston fern. It's perfectly harmless, has no attack, no movement speed, nothing like that. If you plant it in the ground and then forget about it, within 1 week, it will like cover all area, like all all
It
growable area.
it is true that says Samuel Taylor Coleridge, which we have to talk about the fact that apparently Samuel Taylor Coleridge has come back to life and is in our chat. But for now, he
Oh
says
wait, I'm not in the chat. Sorry, let me go
he
back
says
to
Ruben
here.
just has some expertise in general, which is true. I'll tell you my favorite plant monster. The best source of plant monsters is from one of the modules, and if you I highly recommend the modules if you're not someone who is excited about writing your own adventures. There's a lot of really
The
good ones.
same. No,
My my
there are
person
really good
well,
modules.
you might just need to take your time in getting into it.
No,
Uh,
no, but like the modules are
but
really good.
one of
Yeah.
my favorite modules, other than Curse of Strahd, which is fantastic, even more
Mm-hmm.
than that, I love Tomb of Annihilation. This is a
Mm-hmm.
great adventure. It is huge. It's full of
Mm-hmm.
great stuff, and it's full of great monsters that were published for the first
Yes.
time in this book. My
Super
favorite of
iconic
which
monsters.
is the Yellow Musk Creeper. This is a
Yeah.
plant monster based on those fungi that zombify ants.
Yes.
What I don't remember the name for them, but this thing
Those
has
are
abilities.
entomopathogenic. I think anyhow, it's irrelevant. It's nothing. They're the ant zombie brains.
Yeah.
That's what they are.
The
You know.
plant has no movement speed, which I appreciate. Things like assassin vines that are plants, but they're snakes, don't work for me. Sorry.
Yeah. No. No,
But
they
this
don't.
one shoots spores and influences people. There's other ones in here like the tri-flowered frond. Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It has a 5 foot movement speed, which cowards just make it still.
Yeah.
uh, it might as well be at that speed. But it's got a handful of really good plant monsters. And when you were talking about it, like this is the only book that I can think of that
Mm-hmm.
has like
Mm-hmm.
legit plant
Yeah.
monsters.
If you
I may be
look,
underselling. There might be one in Volos. The Man Trap is another one in here, and these
mm,
read like some of the stuff I've read from you.
yeah,
But
yeah,
from people that are game designers and not necessarily plant people, which is why I'm excited about your book
yeah.
because you're a plant person, and also you understand plants very, very well.
Well, because it's how to say it. Like you were saying, cowards make it still, give it roots, and that like I resonate with that because I feel like so much of fifth edition is making the Dungeons and Dragons game accessible that it ends up making a lot of the mechanics and the things that you encounter kind of reskins of the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always a way for your character to play a bard, right? You know, there's always a way for any class to become the jack of all trades. When it comes to monsters, the mentality is you have traps, which are static items that impact the environment. You have a couple of monsters or spell effects that aren't technically traps, but that are like related to lairs and dungeons and things like that. But you basically have the environmental aspects of the game, and then you have the agents, right? The
Mm-hmm.
evil agents. You have the monsters that can think, and all of the monsters work in the same basic way. They enter the turn economy in a certain basic way. They have their turn, they do their thing on their turn, and they move and act the same way that the players do. So you end up with the DM basically having pawns that they don't control, which are the characters, and then the pawns that they do control. And so you kind of end up with chess with the DM versus the
Well,
players.
fifth
Kind of,
edition more than past editions leans into the fact that D&D is Dungeons and Dragons is in essence a combat game.
yeah,
It
yeah,
is a
yeah.
fighting game when it comes right down to it, and I think a lot of people rebel against that. I like political intrigue stuff far more than I
Right,
like combat.
right.
The main game I'm playing right now, there has been almost no combat for 3 or 4 sessions now.
Yeah.
We've been talking with like a couple low tier political leaders, and I've been like maneuvering to get my way back to political prominence in another city, uh, a world over, and that's been fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, the combat, I don't want to say it's all the same, but it's all the same template.
Right. And specifically when it comes to the, how to say this, the really amazing stories and, well, so the amazing modules that change the way that people think about the game, or the amazing stories and campaigns that people have memories from, really any amazing session that somebody is going to remember for the rest of their life is either when something profound happens interpersonally, like in the player's life, or interpersonally between players, and there's kind of like this there's this unfolding narrative or this unfolding story or moment that everybody gets caught up in and learns about themselves, and they achieve something, right? Or it happens when the game changes and the rules, that the way that they were thinking about the game and their characters is suddenly flipped on its head. And those are moments like, I'm trying to think of, there were several of those in the Dragonlance. I don't want to, Dragonlance is now old enough that spoilers are back in. It's like, I don't want to spoil things. But the Dragonlance campaign, though, was really good at that, in like bringing in these events and moments that just totally change the way that the whole campaign works, and they change your assumptions about what's possible in the game. And I feel like now that falls so much on the improvisational skill of the DM, or it falls on them using a really good module that's able to make that happen narratively. But what I kind of want to do, like my dissatisfaction with plant monsters that are just goblins that have leaves growing out of them, like an awakened shrub. An awakened shrub is literally a shrub. It's a topiary that a dryad or a tree ant points at and says, "Fight for me." And
It's
so it now
Pumpkin from
has
Steven Universe. It's a dog.
it's not interesting as a monster because, number one, there's no interesting lore or unique traits of it. So I mean, like, at least kobolds are interesting because they like have this weird dragon cult going on into the ground and they fight better when they're together. Like kobolds have like a whole history of lore. So they're just it's a lizard. Like it's a lizard with a stick, and it's going to poke you, and it's but it does have lore, and it kind of has like this flavor to it, of the kobold lair and stuff like that.
I'll tell you what makes kobolds interesting. And I'm just using kobolds because that's the example you gave
Yeah.
me. It was an interesting twist that all of their technology is based around stuffing other living things in a box or on the end of a stick. So it's not a lizard
Yeah.
with a stick. It's a lizard with a stick that they tied a scorpion onto and hope that it stays there long enough to do something. Or they
Yeah.
put a skunk in a box and it's going to throw that at you. Or
Right.
something like
Like
that.
there's
That's interesting.
right, and there's a quality of the kobold, which is that they're devious and ingenious, right?
Yeah.
And so like
They're
you have
toddlers.
the basic template, which is functionally boring. It's a lizard, and then you give it flair. You give it a quality that makes it interesting. That basically starts that process in the DM's mind of like then going into coming up with scenarios and using them. Like it's the germ or it's the seed that the creative process grows off of. And if you want really fun combat and you want campaigns and you want games where your players experience that moment of, wait, the rules don't apply. The game that I thought I was playing is different. I have new choices to make. I have new ways to think about combat. I have new challenges. It's not just a matter of increasing the amount of dice I roll when I do damage. It's a matter of thinking differently about how I approach the challenges. Like those are the awesome games. And if you want to get your party and your DM there, you need to give them the seeds for that creative process to happen so that the DM can turn the tables. Like the DM can't turn the tables on the player if all of the tables are bolted to the ground and there's no mobility, right? There's nothing. There's
Yeah.
nothing to do. Um,
So
yeah,
let's take a look at the actual book.
yeah, yeah.
Or I say book. To be clear, currently the book is in the format of posts on your Patreon,
Yeah, it's like 100 random scattered posts on the page.
um,
It's a disaster
which is
right
still cool.
now. Yeah,
But just saying what it actually is.
yeah,
So let's switch over to that screen. So here we are on Ruben's Patreon, and they can still see you, Ruben.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. They can. Well, they can't see my face, but they can see the. Oh yeah, no, here. Wow, this is so
yeah,
cool. Awesome. I love it.
I told you it would work. I just had to fiddle with it.
Yeah.
Much like a kobold, I am good at fiddling with things.
Your devious ingenuity. That's what it is.
So, if we look at Ruben's Patreon, I don't know how many people are familiar with Patreon. If you're not, let's just give a brief overview of the site. Patreon allows you to make an account as either a creator or a patron, or a combination. You can do both. But that you
Yeah.
can post your content on there, locking it behind different levels of paywall, or no paywalls at all. I believe you can just set everything to free, or pay what you want. And then people can go on and decide that, yeah, I'll give you $5 a month for that content. I follow two people currently. I'm about to add more. The first one I follow is Dynamic Dungeons. It's this guy that makes amazing maps for tabletop gaming that are animated, so they move and they have little birds flying across or the trees sway in the breeze, and they have audio files with them. They're really cool, and I highly recommend him. Maybe I should invite him to be on the show sometime.
Do it.
And I have the Rook and the Fox. Um, Currently, the Rook and the Fox has 5 patrons. My patron title is Several Kobolds in a Coat.
Yeah.
Ruben, one of my favorite things about about your page are the titles for
Yeah.
patrons. We have is it still called Kobolds in a Coat? It's something like that.
I
I have
think now
multiple
it's
kobold combat encounter.
yeah, the multiple kobold combat. I went back through and I tweaked them all because my expectations for how the site would work and the content that people would have access to was wrong when I started the Patreon, and I realized like, oh, I thought that like having access to commenting was going to be this huge deal. That's really
Yeah,
not a huge deal on Patreon. So like, that's not a special thing. So I had to restructure
yeah.
them.
We also
But
have for $1 you can be an NPC and have this little dude. That makes me think of the raccoon you drew in college with the hookah pipe.
Mr. Cooper
Which gives you a
Raccoon.
character name, so you get a Patreon tag, and access to content. Then there's Bugbear. Oh, I love that Bugbear, Ruben.
Why, thank you. I went old school for that bugbear.
Yeah. Then so that's $4, and it goes on from or $7, and it goes on from there. So there's
Yeah,
different
I
ranks.
haven't trotted out the higher levels are going to have to come in when I start doing stage 2 of the book, when I actually start like producing graphics and stuff like that for the book. So those ones are going to get into the like you can be an Eldritch patron. I have a friend who's like, can I be an Eldritch patron? And I'm like, yeah, sure you can. You can totally be an Eldritch
So just to clarify on the levels, you have access to all the content itself at NPC, right? The things that you
patron.
get when you go up from there are things like the dialogue options and such,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so if you want to join for $1, just to be clear to people, that'll get you all the content,
Yeah, yeah.
which is the meat and potatoes.
All of the content. So I wanted from the very beginning to not make it content restricted, like because at getting into D&D in school, when you're kind of like you don't have super reliable work and you're spending all of your money like on classes and stuff like that, like the basically the people who need gaming the most in their life are the people who have the least money to spend on it as a hobby. And so I didn't ever want to make the raw content like hidden behind a paywall, even if it's like a $5 or $10 paywall. Like I wanted that to be available. So I struggled. Patreon doesn't let you have a $0 tier, I don't think. You can publish public access stuff. And so about half of the stuff I publish on the Patreon is public access. You don't even have to be a subscriber to my Patreon to get that. You can go to the Patreon on Patreon. You can go to Rook and Fox. You can see it. You can download it. You can use it in your own games. To see the process behind the creation of that, you have to go in, and that's just the $1 tier because I wanted that to be the lowest possible investment because I wanted
Yeah.
that to be like,
Before
give me
we get
anything at
into
all.
yeah,
Just get on board and then see it all. So
before we get into actual monsters, let me ask you a couple questions about like people who might want to use this kind of stuff. Needless to say, if I want to play in a game, I'm going to be able to use this stuff. That goes without saying.
yeah.
If I want to make an adventure and I want to include a couple of your monsters, which means I'm probably going to want to put some stat box in my publication. Do I need to contact you for that and ask first?
No, if it's public, don't ask. Do credit me. That would be great
Hmm.
if you wanted to put that in there. And then the only difficulty comes up when we're talking about publication via other, and this is a big deal. Why am I publishing on Patreon? There are other venues to publish, especially with D&D, because Wizards actually has their own like kind of sanctioned homebrew platform with the DMs Guild where
And
you
we're going
can
to talk
pay.
about that too, for
Yeah,
sure.
we're going to talk about that later. When you start publishing, if you basically, it's a question of publication. And once you start publishing through the available platforms, then you get into copyright infringement and stuff like that. Not really copyright infringement, but legal issues that would. So, for example, if you did put my stat block plants in your module and then published that through certain venues, then I would lose rights to that module on my own page. So that's kind of a, or I would lose the publishing rights to do that, or you would have to take your stuff down or something
Mhm.
like that. So
And
cross publication is tricky,
yeah,
but
and I think the main reason I'm asking that is I kind of want to use this stream a little bit to talk about designer etiquette.
yes,
I think that is an interesting etiquette question. A lot of people would not be cool with that without asking permission. Just if you're looking to design
yeah,
a module or an adventure, personally, I'm going to start putting out some subclasses. Feel free to use them, but same thing, like it's a good practice to ask before using something. Most people are going to be cool with it.
yeah,
There's a select group of people that won't be, but otherwise, most people will want a credit. They might want a small payment if that is their profession. And I mean,
right,
pay
yeah,
artists. You should anyways support the people who are making these games possible for all of
yeah,
us. But if you can't, at least ask. And if they're willing to do it, make sure you give them a credit in the end of the book or the beginning.
yeah,
And most people
yeah,
are gonna be really cool with helping you create too. At the end of
right.
the
And
day.
that's my goal. Like,
Mm-hmm.
right. So my goal in starting this project wasn't, I see. So I mean, like, there's a little bit of, like, business involved, like in the mentality of seeing, like, oh, there's a deficit, there's a need, or like there's a kind of a niche that's left open. People aren't designing like environmentally interesting plant monsters that alter the turn sequence of combat, or like engage with characters in unique ways that present unique challenges for the DM and the players to like
Mm-hmm.
face fun new challenges. So like, yeah, there's definitely an open niche for that. There's an open, like a there's no supply for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but my goal wasn't to say, oh, I'm creative, so I'm going to fill that need, and that is how I'm going to make my money. It was, this is a need, not just, or this is an absence, not just in the content being produced, but like in the resources that other creators have. And to me, D&D is fundamentally about helping people, um, create, right? It's about helping people have that experience of like self-discovery and learning, and getting the opportunity to experience creative outlet in a constructed way that doesn't have that really high bar of a ton of training in like an artistic discipline, or a ton of like resources and materials that you have to buy and things like that. Like, it's a game, it's accessible, and it helps people enter that world of creativity,
Mm-hmm.
which is just so good. Like, it's so good for people, and it's so transformative and powerful. And so, like, fundamentally, what I'm doing is I'm trying to create resources for people to make better and more fun games that are more engaging,
And I think
right?
that's true
And
for
bring
most of
that
the
up. Yeah,
people on here. Not
yeah.
all, of course. There are people out here trying to make a living, and again, please support that. But a lot of people
Well,
just want to be part of the community.
yeah, and it's
Um,
not mutually exclusive. Like, you
no, of course
can,
not.
like, there's a lot of people who do really, they are really good DMs, and so they do DM for hire for public campaigns or conference campaigns. Like, Gen Con hires DMs every year to run campaigns, and they can be homebrew campaigns. Like, Gen Con just says, listen, we want a number of DMs at a table, so anybody that wants to walk in out of the conference and play a 1 or 2 hour one shot can.
Mm-hmm.
And we have stuff that you can play, but we will pay for that, and you can make money doing that. And it's a good way to make money. Like, it's a good way to use your own strengths to give people a good time, and pay your bills with that and buy your groceries with that. But like, I think that most people, it's a mix, right? There's very few people that are doing gaming content exclusively to pay the bills.
Yeah,
Like,
I think.
most people are in it because they like it themselves.
Yeah,
Like, they enjoy it, and they want to bring other
yeah.
people into that experience.
I think that the people that are a little more possessive, for lack of a better word, of their content is kind of a once bitten twice shy scenario.
Yeah, yeah.
We live in a world where a lot of people think exposure is a great form of currency for art, and I think there's a certain level of like,
Don't expose your artists. That's harassment.
and I think there's a certain level of maybe jaded sounds bad, but but it doesn't have to be bad. You can be jaded for a reason. And in this case, I think a lot of people are tired of their art being taken, and so
Yeah.
it creates the other extreme, which I get.
Yeah, and there's a vulnerability too of kind of putting creative content out there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
one of the most insulting things that you can experience as an artist is having somebody else tell you how to fix your art. because
Yeah.
you put comment into it, and then somebody who unsolicited comes in and improves on your art, right? Like they fix it for you or they make it better. That's like insulting, and it's also really vulnerable, and it's inconsiderate. And like I think a lot of people get burned when they throw an idea out there, and before they've even fully developed their idea, somebody else picks up on it, somebody else gets
Mhm.
excited, and like then just walks all over it, makes it into their thing and runs off with it. And
Yeah.
like that's a fear that we all have. And like when you're in the arts, you have to learn how to check that drive in
Yeah, I was
yourself.
gonna
Like you
say
have
we've
to
had
learn how to,
training for
yeah.
that. We when we were in art classes together and separate, both regardless of what the art was, when I took 2D design and you had the same teacher as me, we
Yeah.
um we would take all of our works that we had made that week, all of our canvases and papers and stuff, and put them on the wall around the room, and everyone would go through and say bad things about them. But
Yeah.
we also like were all aware
Yeah.
that we were friends and colleagues at the school and knew that like we were just trying to help each other get better. So I think we had the opportunity to develop a thick skin. Same as theater. We would get
Yeah.
up on stage and do a monologue or something and have the wonderful Ken Zimmerman, our acting teacher, artistic director of a theater in
Yeah.
Memphis, formerly, um, just just go all out in telling us why it wasn't good and why it was good in a very honest
Yeah.
way. It's hard to get that in the public sphere in a
It
way that
is.
is safe and comfortable. And safety, like
Yeah.
I don't. Safe matters, and
So,
there are some Facebook and other communities where you can do that, where it's dedicated to giving constructive criticism. And
yeah.
maybe something we should do is I'll add in the description for this video on YouTube when it goes up some lists of some of those avenues where you can get
Yeah.
constructive
That'd be
criticism.
really good.
And
That would be really
furthermore, I don't want to invite you to this, Ruben, but myself and probably Ruben,
good. Mhm.
send us your stuff. Send it to kctwilliams92 at
Oh yeah,
google.com,
absolutely. I put my
and I'll be happy
well,
to send you notes that are
I was gonna say I'll put it in
honest
there,
but
but then I'm
nice.
like the most notorious person at never getting back to people. So
Yeah,
like
I've had to get
I
better
try.
about it since I work in the news now, and I get tips from people because they get mad
Yeah.
if I don't answer them.
Yeah.
But if you email, and I'm sure there's plenty of people out there. If you have other people in your game group, those are your friends, right? Share your content with them, and I'm sure they'd be happy to give you honest but good criticism. Don't be afraid to show your stuff to people.
Yeah.
Um, but
Well,
anyway,
because
yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's safe matters, and then also like maintaining control over your creative process matters because
Hmm.
people could be super brutal in a review, but it was structured in such a way that they could tell you what they thought was wrong with your piece, but they didn't have the power to actually make those changes. And
Yeah.
so if you chose to make those changes, you were doing that because it was something that you wanted to do with your own art. And the kind of scary part of self-publication or getting your stuff out there and putting it out there where a lot of people are engaging with it is that not only do you if you haven't been through like a creative process or just grown up in an environment where you had to develop that tough skin to like kind of hear critics and then let it bounce off and process through it without taking it personally, not only is it hard to kind of build that up just suddenly by yourself, it also feels super risky to put stuff out there because other people will not respect
Hmm.
your creative control over the process. So
Have you
like,
ever gotten like overly critical communication from people that have visited your Patreon?
no, actually, my Patreon gets a lot. People don't comment when they visit my Patreon.
Well, I
I
know you
have
share stuff
gotten,
too with the D&D 5e Facebook group.
yeah. So on Facebook and on Instagram, and then on other like social media or like just in person, like an informal kind of at a game shop, stopping at the miniature market, and talking about stuff like that. There are people who will offer like before you're even done explaining your idea, they're already telling you why it's a dumb idea and their idea is better. And so, like, you do run into those people, or you run into the people who are super convinced that they have a brilliant thing that you should try, which is actually something that you tried in stage two of this idea that didn't work.
Hmm.
Right. And so, like, there's always these tricky conversations where some people you just have to be like, okay, thanks for your input. Like, I'll totally
Yeah,
consider that,
sure.
and then other people, you have to try to find a way to say, yeah, I've been there, done that, or interesting idea, um, without like taking it personally, feeling like they're taking control of it, or actually without letting them take control of it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll take that
and
into
maintaining
consideration.
ownership.
Thanks. Moving on.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, but let's actually look at some monsters, some mamsters.
yeah.
So just the most recent, and if you look, there is not a book yet, right? So
Yeah,
so
no,
you are in stage one of this project. It's currently in
yeah,
the form of posts on Patreon, a
right.
combination of posts of art and stat blocks for the most part.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
Um,
mostly art. So the idea came to me looking at so being in that place where I was like, I don't want to let my art die, the poor dead art. And I also don't want to overextend myself, but I also don't want to stop. I don't want to keep telling myself, I can't do that. I can't do that. So I decided that there were 40, I found 40 plant monsters. And I think I went to the D20 or the Roll20 SRD. So Roll20, I'll put the chat right there. Let's see. Whoops. Roll20 dot, is it org or net?
net.
It's roll20.net.
Yeah.
Okay. So Roll20 is the official 5th edition D&D SRD. So that's the database where they have all of their public domain material. So basically, anybody that's doing any creative project is allowed to take, copy, and paste anything on Roll20, use that in any campaign. The only thing that you can't do is claim authorship of it. So you have to basically say stats for the skeleton, the Androsphinx, and the Blue Dragon Wormling were all taken from the
Yeah.
Roll20 50 D&D SRD. So that's like
Yeah.
free.
To be
Everybody can
clear
use
as
it.
well,
Yeah.
that is one of the sources of it. However, it is available officially on the Systems Reference Document,
Yeah.
is what SRD stands for.
Yeah.
It is available on the Wizards of the Coast page
Yes.
directly as a PDF download. So I'll share that URL as well, where you can go and download
Yeah.
that link.
Yeah.
Um,
The wizard. So what is that one called? Sorry, the D&D. What is the? It's not Forge for the D&D Forge. It's
I know what you're talking about. There's D&D Beyond has a
D&D Beyond.
copy.
That's what it is. I'm thinking D&D Beyond. D&D Beyond, you do have to have an account. It's free to make an account, but then you can actually pay for membership and get
Yeah.
various tiers of
And
stuff.
if you're on here on Twitch, then you just put in
Right.
your Twitch login.
Roll20 started as their free database,
Mm.
and
They are independent though. They're not are connected to Wizards.
right, just everything that's on Roll20 is licensed by Wizards.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so Wizards has licensed that. So yeah, I think I said that it was the official Wizards. It's not the official Wizards 5e SRD. It's an officially licensed 5e SRD under Roll20 through Wizards. But like that was created as a gameplay template, so you can actually play games with that
Mm.
template there on Roll20. But anything that you can find on Roll20, anything that you can find on D&D Beyond and stuff like that is generally public domain. You can use it. And so I went through basically those sites. I went through Roll20. I went to D&D Beyond. I went. I didn't use the monster manual because that's exclusive content. That's not stuff that's public domain that you can freely reference anywhere. Um, I did look at the monster manual, but I didn't look at the monster manual for monsters. But like,
Mm-hmm.
I basically came up with a number, and the number was 40. There's 40 plant monsters that anybody has access to in D&D, and about half of them are variants on a Myconid warrior. So there's 40 plant monsters, 20 of which are goblins made out of mushroom, and variants of that. And so that really leaves you with 20 plant monsters that are actually plants that might even have a movement speed and stuff, but they're not. At least they're not literally a humanoid form with weapons that comes after you and is just made of a vegetable material. And so the challenge I set myself was I can double that number. I can double the amount of plant monsters because I've already come up with a half dozen in
Mm-hmm.
the last couple months
So
doing
that's your
this
goal, 80.
campaign for my friend. Say what?
That's your goal, 80.
My goal is 40 to produce another 40.
Oh, okay.
So stage one is the 40 base templates.
Okay.
And each one of those templates, about half of the templates so far are things that can branch out and be developed into other kinds of monsters as well. So a lot of the earlier ones are big on that. So you have the
Mhm.
spitting orchid in Tomb of Annihilation. In Cholt, there was a what is it called? It was called a stinging or a. They had a poisoned orchid. I learned about that later because I actually didn't look at Tomb of Annihilation when I was making my plans, but I looked into that. And but anyhow, point being, like a lot of the earlier plants that I made are diversifiable. So they're plant monsters that there need to be multiple challenge ratings of them in the same way that you have, multiple challenge rating of bandits. You
Yeah.
have bandit chiefs, you have, bandit thugs, you have bandit warlords, you have,
I'm
an
trying to
or
find the wild spitting orchid. Here's that one, just as an
yeah.
example.
It's way in the beginning. There we
Yeah,
go.
this one was
Fungus,
published
wild spitting orchid. That's the newest one right there.
January 31st. So
Yeah,
that's
I
been a little
redid
while.
the download template for that. So there was another one that was published last year, but that's the newest
Okay,
download
so let's take
template.
a look at that one. We haven't looked at a monster yet, so let's do that.
Yeah,
We are an hour and 19 minutes into the stream, and we are way behind. Which I knew would happen because we are both people that get off on tangents.
it's
Um,
a
I know
it's
these
a
streams are supposed to be 2 hours. I make no promises. um, so we have the wild spitting orchid, and I love that name. First of all, um, we have an armor class of
yeah.
5. It is a tiny plant, to be specific. So
Teeny tiny.
tiny is very small, to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
A 0 speed, yes. Um, Vulnerabilities to cold, that makes obvious
It's an
sense.
orchid, yeah.
Piercing and acid damage resistance. Why is it resistant to acid?
So this is about you talked about tangents. Welcome to the biggest tangent of them all. So one of the reasons that most of the plant monsters in the available resources are basically variants of animal monsters is because if you're thinking about it, if you're thinking about it from a monster's perspective, where you're not really thinking about plants in a plant-like way, right? In terms
Mm-hmm.
of plants, um, they don't have any of the strengths of monsters. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to make a dangerous plant without just making a tree, like a tree ant. A tree ant or a shambling mound is an iconic plant monster that actually poses a challenge to a mid-level to high-level party because it
So
has too
is
many hit points and it has movement speed and it hits really hard.
Is
And
that
if
then to give your plants like a specific like differentiation of strength, or is there like like an actual
yeah,
herbiological? Okay.
both, because basically, if you're thinking about D&D monsters on the terms of the iconic original monsters, owl bears, goblins, kobolds, giants, things like that, the things that make them dangerous are like their resilience, their movement, like they're free agents and they move, they can follow the party, they can strategically move around the battlefield, and then the way that they attack and they hit. And with plants, you're taking away all of those things, which I think is why there's not a lot of plant monsters, because unless you know more about plants, right, taking away movement speed, taking away all of these hit points, taking away its versatility with weapons and things like that, takes away everything that made it a threat to the party in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you just go straight into tree ant territory or awakened tree territory, where you literally just have a tree, and the only thing that makes it a challenge is that it takes a long time to kill and it could fall on you.
Tree
Like,
man go burr.
right, yeah, yeah. When you take away those monster qualities, plant monsters that are just basically photosynthetic goblins, they lose everything that makes them a challenge to the
Mm-hmm.
party. So my frustration with that is that that's not thinking about plants the way that plants actually operate. And so
Okay.
the thing that makes plants, like from a botanical perspective, the thing that makes plants interesting and different than us is that plants are resistant to things that we're not. So, like, plants can't be poisoned by gaseous poisons. Yes, plants can be poisoned by, like, iodine gas or chlorine gas or something like that. Right.
Something that
Um,
melts things.
right. But, like, is a tree going to experience immediate damage from an acid burn the way that a human will?
Hmm.
No, a tree is not. A tree is not even going to experience immediate damage from a fireball. Like, if you're actually thinking about a tree, it makes sense for it to have like vulnerability to fire because it sets on fire, right? But that actually is going to work by a burning mechanic, right? And the tree's not actually immediately going to take significant damage from the fire. The
Interesting.
fire is not going to damage the core tissue of the tree. So, like with the orchid right there, things like structure. The plant's tiny and it's made of these thin, whippy little leaves. Have you ever tried to prune a tree um, with an ice pick? You can't do it. So, like, if you're thinking about the plant in terms of a goblin, you can very effectively prune a goblin with an ice pick. Goblins take a lot of damage from an ice pick, and in D&D, a dagger is an ice pick. It does the smallest amount of piercing damage possible. It pokes a hole in something, and that's how it kills it. But when you're dealing with something that, like, even though it may be super small and vulnerable and have very few hit points, it's made up of a bunch of like whippy little twigs. There's not a surface area for piercing damage to go in. So if you've tried to hunt, like it's one thing to hunt deer with a bow and like a bow, right? Bow hunting for deer. It's a totally different thing to hunt birds with a bow because there's less bird to hit, And
Yeah.
if you've ever tried to hunt like, I don't know, sunflowers with a bow, like like you cannot just niftily cut down like with an axe or with a sword. Heck yeah, if you've ever been out there like pruning kudzu or pruning poke or something like that with a machete,
I really
machetes
want
are
to see
great.
someone bow hunt sunflowers now. That would
Yeah,
be.
I mean, like if somebody tells you go out and pick some flowers for me out of the pick me a handful of lilacs, you're not going to take an ice pick out there because when it comes to the mechanics of stabbing, plants are just inherently like resistant to stabbing. They're teeny tiny surface area things, and it might be a really fragile, floppy little stem like on a sunflower, but like something that a machete can take out in one hit, an arrow will not take out. Like it doesn't. Like me and my cousins used to prune sumac trees with guns. I did grow up in the South, right? I am Southern. So I don't. I lost my accent since moving to St. Louis. That's another tangent. I'm
Ruben,
too much.
you didn't really. I hate to tell you, you
Well,
didn't.
no, I tried not to have an accent. Like when I was in Tennessee, I like tried not to have an accent, and then now that I've been in St. Louis,
You
I've
want
lost it.
one?
I can't find it again.
Oh,
Um,
but anyways. So we have that. I like that they're immune to psychic damage. That makes perfect sense. That they
yeah,
can't be deafened, of course. They can't be frightened. If you can frighten a plant, I'm really interested.
yeah, yeah. What are you
Poison or
gonna do to find a
prone.
plant? Right.
Senses simple. What is simple sight?
Okay, so this is getting into the world of non-copyright infringement and also things that we take for granted with D&D traits and features that don't make any sense for plants. So, like a tiny monster that is just a goblin with photosynthesis, right? If you start thinking about it as a plant, right, it doesn't make sense for it to be able to be knocked prone. It doesn't make sense for it to be frightened. It's a plant. Um, uh, yes, you successfully killed the deer. You have successfully ice picked the deer.
But
Um,
just statistically, like what is simple sight? Like what would that
so yeah, the
encompass?
idea with that is that a lot of the traits and senses, so in the same way that it makes sense for plants to have resistances and condition immunities that living animals don't have, which then turns a really squishy plant into a more formidable opponent that actually takes strategy to kill. Um, Plants don't have eyes,
Hmm.
but plants do have perception. Tremor sense is a really big one that's already in the D&D universe, so I don't have to come up with that. Blind sight makes sense. Blind sight is what they use for creatures that have echolocation or creatures that have like it's technically simple sight. I came up with Simple Sight for plants that have basically a more developed version of Blind Sight. So it's not Blind Sight because Blind Sight works in the darkness. Um, Simple Sight is a light based sight because there are plants with light sensitivity, right, that can tell when something is shadowing them or something like that. So I wanted to give, because they are monsters too. Like I'm not just trying to like give an actual potted, bay
Yeah.
laurel. The potted lemon tree on your back porch is not what I'm trying to create. There are monsters. So some of them do have tentacles and eyes, or they have teeth and stuff like that, right? There's some fantasy elements of that. But I also wanted to say like plants don't see by echolocation. Some of them do. But like
Interesting.
if I'm going to give this creature sight, it doesn't have eyes, so it's going to be some version of blind sight. But I'm also going to make that light sensitive because it's a plant. It depends on light. There we
Yeah,
go.
I noticed. I also noticed you didn't give them the six attributes: strength, dexterity, constitution, so on and so forth. Was that on purpose, or?
Oh, I am. So down there, you'll see below. There's a smaller image right there underneath the larger
Oh, I
the
see.
larger template, right? And if you open that up, then that's where you'll see the attack abilities of the plant, and then you'll see the general stats. So I have general stats at the bottom. Usually those come first in typical fifth edition template. I always put them last because for me, they don't tell you about the plant so much.
Hmm.
They're just there to reference for as a DM, so I don't mind changing the format of that. I also don't want the format to be exactly the typical book, the published
Interesting.
version. Yeah.
So let's move on. That's really interesting. They can be trained to recognize a simple word, so they are a little more than just a normal plant. See, I probably would have leaned even further in and said no languages. So that's really interesting. Yeah, I would say immune to cutting word because technically that's psychic damage.
Right.
I know
Yeah.
you're
So
trying to
no.
make a joke, Samuel, but I mean, rules is written. Gotta
Yeah,
gotta
hey,
gotta cut
listen,
that
it's the
shit out.
rules. It's the rules.
We have epiphyte,
Yeah.
which is this brings up another. I don't want to get too deep into this, but that brings up the question of like how much of a biologist do you have to be to understand some of the content in the herbarium.
That's been like a fun challenge and a challenge. So like one of the first things that I realized was going to be necessary was a different basis for abilities because plants do not have dexterity.
Hmm.
And fifth edition is a dexterity based game.
Have you thought about including like a science terms glossary in the eventual publication?
Yes, yeah. So a lot of these plants are simple monsters that they should like functionally fit entirely on one little index card, the same way that a kobold
Hmm.
or a goblin or something like that does. Currently, I'm averaging two or three of these cards. So if you look at this image right here, the wild spitting orchid, you can see that there's two cards that this monster fits on. My average is two or three. Some of the more complicated monsters are on like four. I think that there's one that goes to five, but then I realized I needed to take the randomizing tables off and put those in a glossary, and so I just took them off.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of that is because I'm explaining a lot of things that should be in a glossary.
Hmm.
So in fifth edition, the reason that the monster descriptions are so short is because um, they don't have to explain what prone means,
Yeah.
right? They don't have to explain what charmed means. They just say, okay, so if a target fails, the unicorns, like if the unicorn, example, if the unicorn runs more than 10 feet in a straight line before it hits you with its horn attack, right? It does additional damage and it knocks you prone, and that's all that they have to say. Prone is an actual condition, right? It has a definition. It affects combat, but that's in a glossary that you can look up. You can just
Hmm.
reference that. With a lot of the abilities that I'm inventing for plants, I don't have that, so I have to write out what that is and what that means every single
Okay.
time. So I will, yeah. So stage one is just getting the 40 base concepts out there, and then stage two is actually turning this whole thing into a book, right? And then in the future, the idea is that stage three would be not just making the book available online, but also trying to publish that,
Hmm.
in a like a printable form.
Yeah.
But
So let's look at what epiphyte actually does. And I don't mean to cut you off, but
you
I
know,
know
but
I
it's a
know
perfect
you.
example.
Um,
Right. So epiphyte is the botanical
yeah.
term, right? That's something that grows.
Hmm.
That's something that grows on something else. It grows
Okay.
up in the branches of the rainforest.
So the spitting orchid naturally grows in the crevices of rock faces and tree branches, where it hides its tender new growth. It naturally has 3/4 cover plus 5 AC against attacks from creatures below it, and half cover plus 2 AC against creatures level with it. That's really interesting that you included lore with the stats in that way. Typically,
Yeah.
those two things are separated, so there's like a secondary, like not stat block text. Like if you look
Hmm.
at dragons, you get the dragon lore separate from the stat block,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I get why, but I like that it's included right here because it's important. Like the way the monster thing works is important, and in this case, like that tells me where to put it. If I'm
Yeah.
having the characters, we'll go to Chol. If you find yourself climbing, whatever the name of that rock face is, it's a pillar of sheer stone going up. That was an old like Aarakocra outpost.
Yeah.
It's just a big like like pillar of stone with that's hollowed out on the inside, and there's a big torch at the top, like Gondor Calls for Aid style. If I'm
Yeah.
having my
Yeah.
players climb that dude, then that's a great place to put a wild spitting orchid. And like
Right.
the stat block tells me that. Like that's where I'm putting that monster.
Right.
Which is really interesting that you included there, and I like that. That it gives it cover is a good. I like that. Of course, we can go deeper in with the zoom in, and you put that before you put like the abilities that can damage players, which is also really interesting.
Because, and that's, I do that with all of these because in my mind, the thing that makes plant monsters interesting is that they're a part of the environment. So if a plant is attacking you, your environment is attacking you. And that means that something about the space that you're navigating, the world that you're in, right, is different. And so the interesting thing that is going to actually make combat different isn't like, so a spitting orchid, what damage does it do? Action, spits in your eye. Ranged weapon attack +3 to hit, reach 30 feet, one target, hit, 2 damage, right? 2 acid damage. And if you didn't duck it, then it gets you in the eye and you're blinded for 1 round, right? Because it's just
Oh,
spitting vinegar in your eye, right? Um,
that would be
that is
so
not enough.
bad climbing a cliff.
Right. That would be super bad climbing a cliff. And that's when it would be interesting. If you just have like, I don't know, 6 spitting orchids in a room, and your players, unless your players are like level 1 sorcerers, these plants are not going to kill them, right? Because anything can kill a level 1 sorcerer. It's tragic. It is. I'm maybe speaking from recent
My
experience.
wife is playing a level 4 sorcerer right now in the camp. Five?
So
1, 2, 3.
squishy.
Five
So
sorcerer,
squishy.
super squishy. MDK Maya is in that campaign with us, and she knows.
Yes.
Um, Thanks for
Them
joining us,
one
by
d
the way,
six
Mariah. Glad
dice.
to have
Yeah.
you. Um,
Them 1d6 hit dice. Gotta love them.
yeah. But yeah, Spitz, like, that is such an inconsequential 2 damage. Meh.
Right.
But blindness for a round when you're climbing and, like, roll at disadvantage with an increased DC
Yeah.
to make that next handhold, that means something.
Right, and where it is matters. And so, like, because of where it is, your party might be getting blinded. Like, one of your party members is getting blinded every other round until you find out where this plant is. And it's super tiny and squishy, but it's growing up in the like in a the on the branch of a tree. You cannot shoot something that's growing on the top of the branch of a tree with an arrow from
Mm-hmm.
below. Like,
Now, another question.
yeah,
Needless to say, this has 5 hit points
yes,
and a 5 armor class. When you find it, you kill it.
yes. When you find it,
Um,
you kill it. If you're on level with
yeah. Have you thought about including like commonality of these plants in here? So like I know if I should put like 10 of these in one place, or if
right,
it's
yeah.
more of the
So
kind of plant that grows one at a time.
that's getting into stage 2, where this is a book. This is
Okay.
definitely a plant that grows in clusters in the same way. So, like, the idea behind this one, actually, I originally came up with this concept for a friend of mine who's a patron on the Patreon now. This is super cool. Was building a campaign, homebrew world, everything. One of these like super creative people that comes up with, you know, background stories, all sorts of good stuff, and had developed this campaign that they were taking their players along, and one of the characters is a dark elfin arcanobotanist. So a dark elf, a drow, who comes to the surface, gets away from the Drow society, is this kind of, we're going, I think at this point, kind of getting toward lawful evil, but neutral leaning chaotic evil at the time of the escape, and becomes fascinated with deadly plants of the above ground world, right? And so has this massive greenhouse full of magical plants from all over. And my friend is trying to introduce this character to her party, in such a way that they follow the story lead, and go to the goblin mines, right? And when this character gets introduced, the character is so interesting that the party decides that they're going to tell this character that they're going to the goblin mines, and then they're going to actually track him to his magical greenhouse. So I get an email, or a text on my phone one night that's like, help me, my party is going to Draven's greenhouse. I need magical plant monsters stat. I was not planning to have this ready for like a month. And so like I was like, what's in a greenhouse? Orchids. They're evil. They will spit in your eye. Like so like the original idea of this is that it should be growing among harmless orchids, either in a greenhouse, or it should be growing on the branches of a jungle tree. So you don't know which orchids are spitting at you, but you're in a jungle and you can see a half dozen orchids blooming in the treetops, and maybe three of them are evil and three of them aren't. But until you see them attacking you, you don't know which are which.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, more of the immersive environmental aspect of it.
So maybe something as a GM, what I might like here, and of course this gets into that criticism thing. Ruben and I know each other and trust each other, and I know he'll tell me if my criticism sucks.
Right.
Have you thought about maybe including one way you might could like represent those clusters is to put like hit points 5 times number in cluster, maximum of 4 or something like that?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Some of the plants that I have, so this was the first one that I put on the Patreon. Some of the ones that I've done since then, I've put on a randomizer. So there's just a note in the early traits that it's like, this plant will have, if this is an underground plant monster that sends, shoots up, or here are plant monsters that grow in clusters, then you've got a randomizing. You're going to run across 1d4 plus 3 of these at a time. Like they move in packs, 1d4 plus.
So that's going to come in the encounter generator stage. Okay, interesting. I like it. Yeah, that was.
And that's definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at another one that kind of explains the first one, and that's an early one too. Let's keep that in mind. I really like that, and I may incorporate that at some point soon.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that one. That one I made up, and I have been in love with it since.
I like violet fungus. I thought this said violet fungus. Is there a violet fungus too?
There is a violet fungus. So the violet fungus there's 2 OG fungal monsters in D&D. They're the Shrieker and the Violent Fungus. Or the Violet Fungus. The Shrieker is a human-sized mushroom that just screams. That's all it does. It is one of my all-time favorite D&D monsters. I used it in the Haunted House campaign that's on my Patreon. I made a Haunted House one-shot a while ago and ran it, and it was super fun. And so I edited it and then put it on the Patreon. Shriekers are in that campaign just because I absolutely adore them. They just scream. It's all they do. And then the violet fungus looks like a shrieker, but it hurts you. It doesn't scream. It hurts you.
To answer, Ruben already told me, but I can let him fill in. It sounds like there's not a strict timeline for the next stage of the project yet.
Oh yeah, sorry, I just saw that. So the stage 1, I started stage 1 October 2019. And I brought in 3 plants in the first week, and so I have 40 weeks. We're currently on week 24, so we're just past the halfway point, and I am hoping to actually continue with my pace of one new plant introduced every week, and 1 plant finished every week from 4 weeks previous. So I want to have that done before October. My tentative start date for the beginning of stage 2 is October again of 2020. And then to give myself another kind of year cycle to wrap that up in the summer, wrap that up before the end of the summer. but also stage 2 is a little bit more out of my depth because I don't know. It depends on me actually getting some.
And that's where the fox from the Rook and the Fox comes in.
Right.
Ruben is
Yeah.
part of a two-person team here.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have your compatriot, who's I don't actually know him.
Yeah, you've never met him. It's kind of weird to me because like he so the Montagues belong in Xanadu. It's where it is, and
Yeah.
their place now. Like they're my housemates. Is
Yeah.
who they are.
To give a little, and I don't want to get off on anecdotes too awful much, but Ruben invoked the name Xanadu, so I have to explain. I said Ruben and I were roommates in college. We lived with about 8 people in a 5-bedroom house that had no heat or air. It was essentially like an old colonial like giant house that was falling apart, both inside and out. The walls leaked. It was cold as hell all the time.
Emphasis on falling apart. Yeah.
And we called it Xanadu because at one point the apartment we had before that, we were all someone put the caves of ice as a sign on my door in the apartment or on the bathroom because it was really cold in the bathroom, and someone put a sign that said "Welcome to the caves of ice," but I believe it was Cody and he put caves of vice because he
There
thought
is
it
a
was
snake in
funny.
the wall. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and we all lived there like kind of in this weird commune where Ruben and I grew like failed to grow vegetables in the front yard,
Oh, it was bad. It
and
was bad.
we had a little basket where everyone would put their grocery money, and Ruben and I would cook for all 8 people.
I take full responsibility. I take full responsibility for the garden.
Yeah, we tried and we ended up just killing the grass. It was real bad. Ruben and I one time cut down a tree and brought it in for a homemade scratching post for the cat. Like we just brought in a whole damn tree.
Yeah.
Oh, a snake did get out in the walls. That's true. Who are you, Samuel Taylor Ulrich? How did you know that? Oh, that's gotta be Cody Jarman. I bet. Yeah, there was a snake named Apophis that we were watching for a friend whose name was Angel, and it escaped and lived in our stairwell, and somehow my dog Dante did not eat it. Um,
So like I just sometimes like try to explain my life to people, and then I just give up because I'm like, if yeah, the snake in the wall. Like, come on. Like, I try to tell that exact story to like my housemates now, and like the level of incredulity of just like
I think one of my
what?
favorite
Like,
things to preface the story, I'm like barely 5 foot tall. I'm super short, and I love to cook, and I'm pretty jolly. And my friends often have referred to me as a hobbit. Specifically, I apparently remind them of Sam Gamgee. The apartment we lived in before this, another one of the roommates got the larger of the rooms, and we agreed when we moved into this house, Casey would get the larger room. The larger room was downstairs. The smaller room was upstairs. But my tall friend Gandalfed his way upstairs and hit his head on every crossbeam. So then it was decided Casey had to move upstairs, and it was the Hobbit hole in the sky. We were a weird group.
oh
We
man,
had
yeah.
like art shows in our apartment and soda pop tastings and like Hobbit viewing parties, and it was a weird place to
It
live.
was like that perfect blend of like eccentricity
The
and
landlord
like
installed a toilet in my closet and made it into the world's smallest bathroom. And there was a
well, like
porcelain
and
doll
like
in there
the
when we
entire
moved in.
upstairs, like both of the rooms upstairs were like thinly veiled refurbishings of like an uninhabitable attic space.
Yes.
They weren't even technically livable rooms. Like they didn't have high enough ceilings to be counted as a room in like a fire report. Like
Yeah.
which the house also was not up. Anyhow,
No.
we are getting way off track.
Sorry,
Um,
we'll move back to what we were actually doing. I'll end the story by saying the kitchen caught fire when we were off doing acting jobs for the summer, and only one roommate was there. And then after the house was basically condemned and we got our money and moved out, the landlord is now a fireman, and that blows my mind.
I like to
Um,
think that it was guilt, like it was remorse. It was a D&D character. It was a D&D character origin backstory. Like people are like, "Well, why is your character a fireman?" And he's like, "Because I used to actually, I used to be a slumlord. and then, and then I set a house on fire by accident, and nearly killed like a whole colony of halflings and a wizard that were living in the
Who was the
there was
wizard?
an adventuring party. Yeah. Anyhow, so
Anyways, you're not just a designer, but an incredible artist, and I'm going to take the
oh,
liberty
okay.
of saying you're an incredible artist because I've always loved your stuff. I own one of your paintings
You do, you
that you
do.
gave me as a wedding gift. You can see it right there. It's titled The Atom, and I desperately need to get it reframed. Because it's Dante keeps knocking it off because where it's sitting right now, it's actually like up against the stairwell, and Dante like puts his nose on the back of it and knocks it
Oh,
down.
that's cute.
But
Yeah,
I love that painting.
yeah.
And you gave it to me as a wedding gift, and you're an incredible artist, and this is a good
I did that in
example.
Shaw's class, I think. I think I did that in Shaw's.
I
No, I didn't do
believe
that in
you
Shaw's
did
class.
some of that as finger painting, if I remember. No, that was another one.
Yeah, there was another
Um,
one that did also do
but
it. But
anyways,
anyway,
we have great art here as well as monster stuff, and they eventually find their way together. But let's look at a couple more monsters before we move on to our other topic. We're gonna be like an hour over time,
well, we've
but
already talked about a lot of it. Like we've already
yeah.
talked a lot about the practical side of Patreon.
Yeah,
So
but I mean,
talking
I'm
about
happy to be here as long as you're happy to be here. But it looks like a
I
lot
will
of your
eventually
stuff
have
on
to pay
here
you for
is
that.
yeah.
But
I feel like a lot of your stuff on here is charcoal work, or
it
pencil
looks like
work.
charcoal. It's graphite pencil or pen, and I use the light filters. So currently, I have to take all of my photo. So the camera on my phone is better than any camera I've ever owned at this point. However, I have low control over quality lighting. I have not set up a good lighting setup. So basically, I draw the sketches on loose leaf paper and scrap paper, and then currently I'm just taking photos of those and then photo editing them to give them an older look so that they look like they're hand drawn field notes.
Yeah, this one's
Um, the, I,
amazing.
the idea that's Char's candle. So that's an underdark. Oh, that is Lolth's gallows. That's one of my favorite plants, and it's one of the grossest plants.
I don't see that one in here.
It's Lolth's gallows. It's the most difficult one to say because of Lolth, hideous Lolth. Let's see, where
If you
is
guys
it?
see something in the chat that I've like scrolled past, feel free to tell me to like go back up to that thing you saw. I'm looking
Yeah,
for Lowell Scallows now because that one really. I remember Emperor Lotus too. I
the
remember
Emperor
really
Lotus
liking
is
this
super
one,
fun.
and I
Yeah,
love the name.
yeah. I had a lot of fun with the Emperor Lotus. So yeah, there's the stats for the Emperor Lotus. There actually is a character stat card that I published for that later, but you might have to search for the Emperor Lotus. There's the tag of it. The tag is down at the bottom of that post. You can
Hmm.
click on that, and it'll bring
I,
up
I,
all the
I
posts.
really want to find the Lulth's Gallows one
Yeah,
though.
look in the post right here that has the illustration of the cannibal tree or the spider tree. I think
Yeah,
it's up a couple or it's down a couple. I don't
here we
know
are.
what way
It's
it's
not got a
ordered.
link in it.
I might not have been doing tags yet. Some of those were some of the earlier ones.
Yeah. However, that one's awesome.
Yeah, that one
I
doesn't have tags. Yeah, that's a shame.
it makes me think of the great old one Rogog from the Lovecraft mythos.
Yeah, so you can see that this one does have little eyes, simple eyes in it. That's an underdark tree that exists in this creepy symbiotic relationship with spiders.
Which is the best of the category tags up at the top to use?
Oh, the ones that are at the top frustrate me because it does the most popular ones, and those are the least interesting ones. So those are the ones that I put on basically everything, and so they're not interesting. So I would like rather. I wish that the less common tags like jungle plants, desert plants, things like that were up at the top, but instead, if I put D&D on anything, since it's on everything, you've got in 70 something posts that D&D is considered a tag on. So
There are 241 categories.
hey, listen, I like my tags, and a lot of them are comical. A lot of them are only on one thing. I have Princess Bride references like as a tag. I think there's like three posts that
What's
have those
Princess
types
Bride a
of it.
tag for? Are they like
I can't even
farting
remember
plants from the
now.
forest of certain death or whatever?
It's not certain death. It is. Oh gosh, what was the reference? It was more recent. I can't remember. I can actually look that up. But yeah, There's a lot of tags. There's too many
What am
tags.
I doing wrong? I'm not seeing. It says there are like 63. I'm only seeing like 12. What am I doing wrong?
63. You're only seeing 12 of what?
I'm only seeing like 12 posts. Not like it says there are 63 posts here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Newest to oldest, sort by newest to oldest. Yeah, maybe there's like a second page or something like that.
Eh. Let's look at. I'm interested in Wandering Gunbulb.
Wandering
Uh,
Gumball was
yeah.
fun. Big fan
Uh,
of Wandering Gumball.
yeah, a lot of your stuff is done in that kind of hand-drawn field sketch style. It often made me think, and this might be a weird one. Some of your stuff makes me think of the journal in the game Ark Survival Evolved.
Yes, yeah,
And I feel like you'd really like that game and the way that it gives you the lore. Because it's all from like a guy who's been stranded on the island before you, who's discovering all this stuff and writing it down as quickly as he can.
yeah,
Um, it's really fun, and this kind of makes me think of that a little, not quite, but a little bit.
yeah.
Um, and I
It's
also
the
just watched Atlantis: The Lost Empire, and the journal in that also comes to mind.
well. There's something that like evokes the sense of um, the Victorian archaeology or old school archaeology about those
Yeah.
hand drawn field sketches because people still do hand drawn field sketches, but there's something about like the era before photography
Hmm.
when those are the images that came out of research sites and digs and stuff like that. So when they're digging up some burial mound, in the north of England or in the coast of England, and you're just like when you look at those old kind of out of the past early archaeological discoveries that were fully documented, it's gotten that quality of those hand drawn sketches that were the first pictures coming out that were
Hmm.
copied and turned into lithographs and stuff. And like that's
Yeah.
the feeling that I want to evoke for this. So in stage two, like turning this into an actual book, there's a lot of plants that I want to do creature art for, like typical
Hmm.
D&D style color, monster drawings. But the actual book itself, like the pages of the book, I want to have those sketches. Um,
Yeah.
I want to have that kind of sketch aesthetic of because the whole premise of the book is that these are being collected by an arch druid, right? So the
Oh,
arch
really?
druid Eldon, right? That's actually I think that's like my third actual post on the Patreon. Um, the
Can you tell me a little bit
story,
about this druid?
yeah. So there was a campaign that Adam and I wrote together. It was our first big D&D project, and we had the chance to run the first half, not the first half, probably the first quarter of it with the group before like the semester ended. Everybody moved, everybody got summer work, stuff like that, and we couldn't run it anymore. Um, but we developed and this was actually the campaign. If any of y'all were like listening an hour and a half ago, back at the beginning of this, at the beginning of this
Rabbit
episode,
hole.
back in the land before time, um, I mentioned coming up with a mystery story and trying to build a D&D campaign that was a compelling mystery story that wasn't just and then you found a clue and you solved the problem, but also didn't like make the entire story depend on your players who are probably like sleep deprived and hyped up on caffeine when they're playing with you. Try to actually work through riddles and clues and things like that. So out of that challenge, we developed a campaign that happens in the city of. I think we ended up putting it in the city of Neverwinter. So we just went ahead and put it straight into 5e.
Hmm.
And one of the significant NPCs in that campaign is a archdruid named Haildun. And Haildun is a wild-shaped druid who is famous for cultivating this phenomenal rose garden somewhere in the forest. And as the campaign goes, the roses that Haildon grows figure more and more prominently into the campaign because one of the rare unique variants that he grows and that can only be acquired from him is the calling card of the Assassin's Guild in the city of Neverwinter. And then there's another rose that's actually it releases a poisonous perfume, and that rose shows up in the story in interesting ways. So the
Is
rose is kind of the symbol of the story. There's a lot of there's a corrupted paladin order, and there's a florist with a dark backstory or a tragic backstory, and there is, there's a lich who has a secret connection in the past to the head of the paladin's order, and there's all of these places that that roses come into play. And Halden started as the source of all of the
Mhm.
roses. He's this gardener,
Was Halden
and
your own creation, or was he part
yeah,
of the
yeah,
Neverwinter lore as it stands?
no, he's
Okay.
not part of any of what we came up with. Halden. Halden was my character, so Adam came
Oh,
up
okay.
with the main characters. This is a tangent, and I know it. I'm going down it anyway. The main characters who lead you through the story are they're the head detectives of a private investigation service that your characters end up being hired in, and they are Alf and Dimitri Hambone, and they are two twins that were joined. They were conjoined at birth at the abdomen, and they were separated by a wizard who didn't know the surgical techniques to safely separate them, so just created a portal at the point of the connection. So their tissue grows over the portal, but the portal still exists, and so the two twins' digestive tracts are still interconnected. But they can move around the city. They're technically still conjoined, but they're separated by magic, and so they move around the city, and they have this innate connection, which mostly looks like if one of them is doing tequila shots in the pub with your party, the other one is getting drunk at the council meeting with the
See,
leaders of Neverwinter.
my first thought is, can we get real creative with that and have one like swallow a note to send it to the other side of the group?
Well, if a Dimitri gets sufficiently bad gas, it opens a minor portal to the astral plane because it is portal magic, and so like there are constantly like lesser infernal beings that are trying to get out of the portal. They're trying to like access the portal that separates the two detectives, the two head investigators, chief investigators, and like that never becomes a major plot point. But there are minor encounters in the story of like flatulence related to the appearance of minor demons and imps in the agency head office. But sorry, anyhow, so like those were Adam's. Like Adam comes up with the guys that kind of lead you through the campaign, and then I came up with the druid for some reason or not. Like I was interested in plants or something, and I came I came up with Halden to be the touch point because there's a lot of plant-based, like, so there's flowers and there's poisons and there's a forest, and at a certain point you're facing up against an order of druids that are protecting certain information, stuff like that. So there's a lot of druidic and plant kind of based lore in the campaign, and Halden became kind of the figurehead of that,
Mhm.
and he ends up being one of the potential final bosses at the end of the story. So if your party leans more neutral evil or chaotic evil and makes decisions that benefit them over the like welfare of the city of Neverwinter, you
Oh,
can
you
end up
included a
facing
good
off.
guy final boss.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
you can end up facing off against an archdruid as the final boss.
I don't think a lot of people think about including a non-villain for their evil PCs. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So the whole campaign is kind of like questions of morality and ethics, and can people change? They can, and then can people also lie about change? And they can, and like you are basically pitted against a corrupt religious order, and you have the options of basically prioritizing structure over ethics or prioritizing morality over structure. So it's very much a law and chaos versus good and evil. So I was really proud of the story that we came
Yeah.
up with. We still haven't had a chance to play test it all the
This
way
is
through.
why I think you really
Yeah,
need to play Zweihander. I think you would
yeah,
get so into it. Just saying. And by the way, eventually I do intend to do a Zweihander stream on this campaign, on this channel,
that would be
and
good.
I'm hoping you will join, Ruben. I think you would be like one
So
of my
bad. I'm
top picks.
so bad at not like keeping track of things, and
It'll be okay. We'll figure it
but
out.
yeah,
I need you
we'll
involved
make it.
in that.
We'll make
All right, let's look at a monster though. We're gonna look at a couple more monsters, and then we're actually gonna talk a little bit about Patreon for people that might
it.
want
Yeah.
to get into that, as well as an alternative in the DM's Guild, which I think is something
Mhm.
that definitely needs to be explained for people that aren't initiated into that.
Yeah, big time.
Um, but let's look at the Wandering Gumbulb. I love the name. I just was watching a trailer for Adventure Time, uh, uh, the new thing on HBO, and that might be why Gumball hit me because it sounds like Princess Gumball.
Yeah,
What is I don't remember the name. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Tangents. Uh,
tangents.
so we have another small plant.
Mm-hmm.
This one is
A lot of them are
chaotic
small.
neutral. This one has an alignment
A lot of them
thing.
are unaligned, and some of them are really powerfully aligned. So
So
like they
how is
kind
a
of very
plant
extreme.
chaotic?
Read it.
Okay. Armor class 10, hit points 10. So again, if you hit it, it dies mostly.
Right.
This one has a
Mm-hmm.
15-foot speed. I'm curious how that works. How would it move, Ruben?
Yep.
Does it tell me in the
Read it.
stat block? Or okay,
It tells you. Yeah.
okay. So it's vulnerable to fire. That makes sense. Again, resistance to bludgeoning and acid. So this time piercing might work, but bludgeoning not so much. And again, immune to poison and psychic. That makes perfect sense to me. I
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah, this
Blinds.
one is kind of a this kind of an animated kohlrabi. It's like a turnip, so piercing does work. Like you can hit a giant rutabaga with an ice pick.
I've always
So
wanted my players to be beaten to death by an evil rutabaga. A
yeah,
chaotic rutabaga.
this is exactly the energy of the this is the my mother told me it was good for me, but I knew better episode of D&D right here.
Okay, so we got fire hazard. Gumbulb gum is quite flammable and can be ignited. A patch of ground covered in gumbulb sap will burn for 1 minute, dealing 1d4 damage. So you include an item that the players can salvage from killing this thing.
Yep, a
Yes!
lot of the plants have
Yes!
items. Yeah.
This makes me happy. One of the things I am desperate for in 5e is a little bit of help as a DM with what my players can scat. Because players want to cut parts off of the things they kill and use
Oh my
them
gosh.
so badly.
The first campaign that I no, this the first no, it was the first campaign that I actually played after that initial like round. The first actual campaign that we actually played. In the second week, I think it was the third session, our party killed a manticore and literally spent the next 3 sessions trying to figure out what to do with manticore parts. None of that is listed in the game. Like there are no rules for what a
No, and
manticore
people
wing
want
can
it
do.
so
But
bad.
like everybody was like, but you
Give
said that
me a
it had a
value for
scorpion
a
tail. Can
Manicore
I get
poison gland. Yeah.
poison out of the tail? And it's like, sure, I guess. Like our DM was all over, was like, I guess, sure, cut anything you want off of this dead, decaying monster corpse. Like that's fine, I guess. Just expect vultures. Like I
This,
can't tell you
yeah,
what to make out of
that's
these. But
something that
anyhow, back
players
to the.
want so bad. One thing I decided was that you can harvest flint from a red dragon's teeth.
Oh, that's a good one.
Like that they have that their molars are one like the top molars are flint and the bottom molars are steel,
Yeah.
and that's how they like spark their like napalm breath. But yeah, like I've always wanted that, and I recently came across a monster cookbook on DM's Guild, and I thought that was brilliant, and I want to make a more detailed one because that one
Yeah,
was more
that
of a
would be good.
joke. But I love that idea, and I love that this includes something that I can take from this thing.
That's one thing that I've wanted to do.
Yeah, turgor pressure.
Like a lot of the earlier plants, not a lot, a few of the earlier plants have like descriptions of items, things that you can harvest from them.
Hmm. I
As
love
I
that.
went on, I as I sorry, I'm responding to a comment here.
Oh, you're fine.
I'm trying to find the post that actually
Yeah,
introduces Halden. He's right there. That's the lowdown on Halden. I
we'll
don't have
talk
another
about him
post
some
that
because I think a lot
specifically
of people
talks
will be
about him.
interested in that NPC. Maybe he's a planeswalker, and can make his way to your games.
Maybe he
But
is.
we
But
have
yeah, but
fire hazard, so it lets off like a napalm gumbulb gum. I love that.
it's like pine
Um,
resin. It's sticky and
mhm.
it's sticky and it's flammable. As I went on, I realized that a lot of the items would belong more in a glossary. And so again, like looking at stage 2, once I have the plants made, actually putting them into a book, one of the things that I want to do is, have a glossary of stats and abilities, things like epiphyte, things that I want to be able to just say in the monster
Yeah,
description, and then you can look that up and see what that means. But then also things
sort
that
of
you
like
can
the weapon
harvest.
traits. Like
Yeah.
where like it tells you the weapon traits, and then after that there's a glossary of like here's what flourish means, here's what
Right.
two-handed
Yeah.
means. I think that's
Right.
really good.
Yeah.
Let's keep looking. Turgor pressure. The Gumble makes its melee attacks using its Constitution modifier, and last time it said rather than its dexterity.
Yes.
That's really interesting, and I think that makes sense for plants. I think that's
Hmm.
something that as a DM, like I would miss that the first few times until a player's like, nuh-uh.
Yeah, its dexterity is -5. How in the world? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one of those things that it shows up a lot. That's one of those botanically based, like, it does not make sense for a plant to fight you with dexterity
No, it's all
because a tree does
it's
not
about its
have dexterity.
internal mechanisms.
Yeah, but it's all about the water pressure in the plant.
Yeah.
And so, like, that turgor pressure shows up on over half of my plants. And there's
Okay.
a couple of those traits that show up all the time because I'm like,
Yeah.
it's a plant.
Um, that's what I'd almost as a DM want, and I know you said you're going to include a scientific glossary. I think Turgor pressure to me, and again,
Hmm.
this is just like I'm reacting as I might if I was running a game with this. I think Turgor pressure, I would in my head like go look that up, and I'm like, why didn't you just say like plant physiology or
Right,
like
yeah.
or like
Yeah. Yeah.
vegetal something.
I
I don't
still need
know.
to, yeah. There's a
Um,
balance to be struck.
like I think that one in particular, Turgor pressure, is just one where I'm like, you didn't have to be technical.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I don't know. I think that that's one of those things where there's a botanical term for it, but I don't know if there's like a colloquial term for like plant
yeah,
like it's what we wilting is the loss of turgor pressure, but like I'm like I know that there's a term. I'm going to come up with the term one day, but for right now, yeah,
yeah. I
that's
think
definitely one of those like
yeah,
feedbacks that I need because
I
some of
would
this
think
stuff I'm
just
like
like
hopefully this isn't.
vegetal physiology or
Yeah,
or vegetal build or something like that.
yeah, or just something like yeah, vegetable strength or vegetal strength or something,
Yeah, something.
or vigor,
Yeah,
vegetable
some.
vigor.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I agree, MDK Maya, that I think people that like that kind that have at least like an introductory level of understanding about herbology. I'm saying herbology like that's the actual term when that's a Harry Potter term.
It's good enough.
But
It's all amazing. It's all
botanical knowledge will like that kind of thing. But I'm worried about the people that don't, I suppose. And I guess this is me leaning towards what we talked about that Wizards has an obsession almost with inclusion. I think
Hmm.
that's one where I'm trying to aim for inclusion in what I think.
Yeah.
Where I don't want to lean too far into that, but that one kind of threw me a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. um,
Sappy flesh.
yes. Yeah.
Let's all be adults here. Melee weapons that deal
Why?
slashing
That's not even
damage or
fucking enough.
piercing damage
Continue.
to the gumbulb will stick in its fibrous, resinous flesh. After landing an attack, the attacker must make a strength saving throw to wrench their blade free. If they fail, they have a gumbulb stuck to their weapon, which is now an improvised weapon with a heavy feature that. Ooh, I love that!
Yeah. You end up with a gigantic turnip glued to the end of your sword.
On top of
So
that, like, it's flammable now.
yes, it is. It is flammable.
Like, I
It
would
is
give them,
flammable,
yeah, weakness to fire until they can
but
get
if
that
they're a
off.
halfling, they can't carry it. I mean, they can't carry it. It's gigantic. It's
Yeah,
the size of a large pumpkin.
but
So
this
like if you
brings me
stack
back,
that,
yeah. This brings me
yeah,
back that I want the monkey palm feat back in D&D for halflings and
yes.
gnomes to wield oversized weapons like a Monster Hunter character. Stem slap. That one's a fun internet term too.
Uh,
Sap. Oh, Ruben, this monster.
listen, listen. I just want to. I'm gonna go share. I'm gonna share a link into the. I'm gonna share a link into the chat right here because it's really important. The plant that inspired this. The plant that inspired this. The plant that inspired this.
Another dramatic display.
Here we go.
Comes from
I'm gonna
Here's
create feedback. I'm gonna create
Send it to me
feedback.
so other people can see it.
The plant that inspired the gumball is technically known as the majestic squirting cucumber. I am not
What?
making that up. There is a plant that is called the majestic squirting cucumber or the squirting cucumber. It is not as non-safe for work as it sounds.
Another
like
dramatic
it
display comes
but
from this
it is
unassuming-looking
it's
plant. The
in
squirting
the age
cucumber.
of the internet, especially, it is particularly.
Oh my god!
It only takes a tiny vibration of it, and the cucumber starts a spectacular show.
Yep. So yeah, some of the plants are super comical, and the whole point is the joke of the existence plant. So the idea of the wandering gumbulb is that it's a turnip that does this, except with flammable glue. So it's a total party meltdown waiting to happen.
Oh, I love it. And I would have to have that video ready
Yes.
during the game so that they know. But it's got Sap Blast, which does what it sounds like. Ejects an amount of gooey resin in a 15-foot cone. That's it. This is what size is this plant? Small.
It can do that once a day.
Plant.
It can internet.
So it's just a really hydrated plant.
Right. It's yeah.
I chose the word hydrated very carefully.
Yeah, good job there. Yeah, so this thing is the size of a large pumpkin. So basically, so it can't use its, and that's another thing that I like taking this ridiculous plant into a more serious direction. That's something that I tried to do, is that a lot of the time plants in the world, like the plants that we know, real plants, the plants that we know.
I mean, that's not inaccurate.
It's not inaccurate, but I'm talking like they're like my family. They are my family.
Have you seen the fountain? There are plants we don't know.
Yeah, plants are your family. But like a lot of plants have really striking abilities, like a Venus flytrap. You think of that. If that was big enough to attack a human, that would be awesome. But a Venus flytrap can't continuously bite you. That's something that it can do once, and if it hits you, you're dead, and if it misses you, you're not.
Yeah.
And so I did want to design the plants to where a lot of them do have really impressive game-changing abilities, but they're not something that they can use again and again in a single combat round. So it's more like the plant tries to change the game, and if the game is changed, then...
Well, this definitely changes the battlefield, right? So like now there's an area on the battlefield that's a problem for you as a player.
And it could catch on fire.
Interesting. Now, here's another question. Can I lash one of these to the front of my shield as a paladin and have a shield of sap blasting?
You could glue it to the front of your shield.
With, if I can get a hold of some sovereign glue?
Well, I mean, just gumbulb glue. You could literally just use the gumbulb's own glue to stick it to the front of your shield, and that is absolutely something that you could do. I doubt that it would learn to sap blast on command. I feel like probably this would be a situation where, like, once a day at a random time.
Do we make it when you roll a natural 20 or a natural 1?
Yeah, and it just happens at the least convenient time for you, and everybody is just soaked in glue and like sticking to their weapons and stuff like that. So
see, the druid in my current campaign is oh lord, the druid in my current campaign would love this. She's very interested in like fungal poisons and stuff like this. I need to introduce her. She's in the chat right now to a sap blaster. Can sap blast on command. This is a family-friendly street. No, it's fine. And here is the gumbulb. We actually have an illustration for that one.
Yeah, that was before I had. Yeah, there's the gumbulb. Yeah, that's the illustration for it right there on the screen.
So does the sap come from this central thing, or does it come from all of these? You include F1, F2 like it's a diagram. Where are the footnotes?
Yeah, I stopped doing those.
Here they are.
I did that for the gumbulb, and I did that for Bishaba's boon. I did like diagrams. I didn't do a cross section for Bishaba's boon. I think I've done it for a couple others, but that's something that I also want to do more of, but I just didn't. Actually, though, right now I have to take a quick lavatory break, so I will be right back.
So we're
and
gonna
I'm going to go drink
yeah.
water.
So we'll take 5 minutes,
And so,
and we'll be right back.
yeah, wrapping up the gumbo there and get back, I guess, with some other maybe less suggestive vegetable or more.
Maybe more. While Ruben's doing that, I also will probably take a short break, but thank you for tuning in to Cover to Cover. We are over time a little bit, but we're going to keep going because I'm having a lot of fun with this. On Cover to Cover, every other Saturday. I guess this is the second Saturday, so we'll do the second and fourth Saturday, probably. Uh, I'll be on talking with or independent artists and game designers and people in the TTRPG community, tabletop gaming community, that are creating their own material and making things that we can all enjoy and designing new games and just talking about like the art form and the community in general and how people can get more involved with it. Um, some of that will be in the form of artists. Some of that will be D&D Beyond uh, people that make their own custom items on there. Maybe some people that use DM's Guild or Patreon. I'm going to have friends of mine that are scholars that talk about the sociology of tabletop gaming. We'll talk about the literary origins of the game. I'm an English teacher, so I love that kind of stuff. But generally, we're going to be highlighting and celebrating the artists that make this community really as interesting and wonderful as it is. We have so many great artists out there that don't get the attention and the recognition that they deserve, and I just really want to highlight those people because they're great. Um, and yeah, and use it in your games. The things I introduce on here, they're people that are trying to make a living off of this, or maybe just trying to share their art. Support them if you can. I realize not everyone can afford um, to get really into the arts and such, but if you can, I highly encourage it.
Oh,
Um,
there's
we are
the
back.
ideal question. This is the perfect time. Although I guess we'll look at one more plant before we dig into this.
We can. What's the question? Is this on DM's Guild or
Uh,
just via Patreon? Currently, it's just Patreon, and Jada,
just
we're
great.
about to explain why. There's some.
Yeah.
I actually really like DM's Guild, and I have quite my own library of things that I've purchased on there. But there are
Mhm.
definitely some limitations. Let's look at one more plant, and then we'll get involved. We'll get more into that. We'll look at one more quickly. We won't spend too much time. I don't see any more stat blocks, Ruben, that are like arted up, which
Yeah,
is fine.
yeah. I stopped doing stat blocks. You said you said you liked the Emperor Lotus. You want to look at the Emperor Lotus?
Yeah, let's look at the Emperor Lotus. That one was really cool.
I've gotten. Let's see. Here we go. Shop is boon. Or
Emperor is a word I have trouble spelling because I
yeah,
forget about the O, like where the O goes.
Emperor. Yeah, Emperor.
Yeah. Uh, MDK Maya, I will share some of this material with you. I definitely think that you and your character Micah would enjoy this. If you don't
Yeah,
like me
absolutely.
mentioning who you are on stream, by the way, feel free to tell me, and I won't. But I just have a habit of like people I know are in the stream, so I tend to talk to them. I know like at least two of you. Emperor Lotus. We do have a stat block for the Emperor Lotus.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Large plant. So this one's pretty big, and it's true neutral. It is.
Hmm.
It is the the gray Jedi of plants.
It is. It's the Buddha of plants. Like it's literally the Buddha of plants. It is.
Huh. The name makes it sound like that. Like I can see that. Not just
Well,
Lotus, but
that's what it is.
Emperor
Like I wanted
Lotus.
to make the lotus something that reflected the use of the lotus like in symbolism and art and stuff like that. And so it's like the lotus is always the symbol of enlightenment and peace
Yeah.
and a higher state of being. So this one's pretty funny too, but it's not funny in the
And
same.
I'm actually really glad we clicked on this one because you've done this with a few of the posts I've seen on your Patreon, where you give different armor classes for different parts of the plants.
Yes, that's another big thing
Can you talk
that like
about that?
makes
Yeah.
yeah. Another thing that makes, in my mind, plants different than monsters, like a typical monsters like goblins and stuff, that's not represented, is the fact that plants are diffused. So plants, if they have strength or consciousness, or like a plant is not like a goblin where if you chopped its head off, it would die. So what that means is that like plants have different kinds of vulnerabilities. It also means that a lot of plants can't really be killed. So there's some plants in this that specify, and the emperor lotus is one of them. Like to kill this plant, go dig it up from the bottom of the river. Like you have to dig up the root, and that takes a lot of time and effort. Otherwise, you can cut it down to the water level. It will stop bothering you, and then it will regrow over the course of the year.
So if I was running this in a game, would it be that if like I'm fighting this plant, for lack of a better term, I would have to get through the flower stalks to kill the root cluster?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could technically dive down underneath, right, and
But
then
under an average
the root
circumstance.
cluster, but that would not work, right? Because there's also other things.
So this
But
is
yeah, the idea is if I want to kill it, I have to wear down the different parts, and
that's really interesting, and I'd love to see this taken to the extreme of like 5 to 7 parts. And yeah, it is like Final Fantasy, and I think that's really. I don't think that like vanilla D&D allows for that amount of strategic thinking, and I wish it did. Like I remember in one of my first campaigns, we did a stint. I did a Planeswalker campaign pretty early because a lot of my players were into Magic the Gathering, and so they had the chance if they died or not died, but if they went unconscious, in a significant moment, I would have them roll 3d20s, and 2 natural 20s meant that their Planeswalker spark ignited. 2 of the 3, because that's like a high chance. One person had that happen, and it became kind of the impetus for this Planeswalker campaign. And they ended up fighting Ulamog, one of the Eldrazi. For those that are familiar with Magic, this is like a Titan from the Netherverse. And they couldn't kill it, but they could kill the summoning stones that were allowing it to manifest on the plane.
Right. Yeah.
And that's something that Casey came up with. That's not something that the raw books have nothing like that. Right. And that's not. I want to be clear. It sounds like I'm shit talking Wizards of the Coast. I actually really like Wizards of the Coast. I think they're a good company for the most part. They have their flaws like any company, but I think Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford and all those guys over there do a great job with their material. But they're limited in what they can do. And that's one of the and they're so invested in making the game open to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that, but I feel like that's where the community can step in and make things that are a little more in-depth. And I love this for that. And I'd like to see that taken to the extreme.
Right, yeah, because Jowda's got saying right here, like it does feel like a Final Fantasy boss fight, right, where you can focus on different parts of the enemy. One of the things that's always frustrating to new D&D players is that I think that because of our experience in video games, which are more prevalent now than when D&D was first released. I mean, when D&D was first released, there were no video games that were available. But then, as third edition, 3.5 and stuff come out, the video games are there, but less people have access to them. But now I think because of video games, especially a lot of the stuff that Bethesda's done, where there's a lot of strategy, it's not just a hitbox. Like there's a lot of strategy in how, or like Dark Souls and like really iconic games that rely on how you approach an attack and where you hit your enemy. Like a lot of players come in and they're like, okay, so we're running at the goblins. You say, DM, that I only have 1 hit per round where I'm going to stab it in the face. And then the DM has to tell the player, you can't stab it in the face. You just stab at it. And based on how much damage you do, we can decide if maybe you did hit it in the face or like just hit it in the shoulder.
Interesting. So maybe this way it actually allows for a little more player freedom, but just in a different way.
Right. And so like one of the things I wanted to do was to say like, because there are monsters that there are monsters that allow you to target different parts of them or that are invulnerable to certain damage from certain angles. Like a Tarask can't be hurt by magic damage from above, right? As long as its underbelly is not exposed, you can't hurt it with magic. And so like there's things like that. But in general, I think it's more interesting to have larger monsters, especially when they are plants. And so there are distinct parts of them. it makes sense to tell your players, yeah, you can aim at the stems. You don't have to aim at the flower. Like, you can aim at the stems. You're not just wildly hacking. You don't have to do it all in your imagination. You can tell me, I'm going to target the branch. I'm going to target the vine that's holding me.
Yeah.
And for most of the plants that have multiple parts in here, that's specified. Like,
Ruben,
anything that grabs you with a vine, you can attack that vine.
in
And
the
it tells
illustration
you.
here for the Emperor Ludus, is that your druid?
No, that's not. That is just a very trepidatious elf.
I love the illustrations because this is not what I saw in my head, and that's because I'm not super well versed in plants. Oh, I love the little skull there in the root system.
Yeah.
This also implies that you're going to have to dive down to get to the roots.
Yeah, you do. The roots are up to 30 feet underwater, so that introduces a whole new set of challenges. But you can read those in the 5th edition book if you want.
Why is there a bee?
Because part of the Emperor Lotus's whole deal is that it's in and this is another thing that I brought in with a lot of the plants. If the plants are against you, the environment is against you, which means that the plant is more than likely in a symbiotic relationship with some other kind of animal that cares about it.
Yeah, I see that now. Colony.
Yep. Well, it's not colony. Colony refers to the fact that these things grow in clusters.
Oh,
and
okay.
Per your earlier question about saying, like, with a spitting orchid, or how many of these are you going to come across at a time? Colony explains that a lot. You're going to come across a lot of these at a time.
Tropical river. So these would be in Chult. The enchanted fragrance of the Emperor Lotus enthralls all those who smell it, endearing them to the lotus plant and enticing them. Oh, that's wonderful. That's some Odysseus stuff right there.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
DC 20. So you're likely going to be enthralled by this plant.
Yes, you are.
Oh, that's wonderful. Path of the water form a layer of strong lily pad-like leaves that spread across the surface of the water. Each leaf is 5 to 6 feet across and can support up to 200 pounds. Now, what I would think, because I know you, I want these abilities to have more than just they do this thing. I want to have a reason for why. And with plants especially, even more so than animals, even though with animals it's a thing too. Plants have very specific, like, evolutionary motives for why a thing happens with them. Why does the Emperor Lotus entice people to stay nearby it? What does that get the plant?
I lost the audio for a minute right there.
So, like most plants, and it's true of animals too, but, like, more with plants. Like, anything that evolution has given a plant...
Yeah, and it
has a reason
in the environment for some reason. So,
what does the Emperor Lotus get from getting people to stay on top of it?
Well, okay, so to balance that, a lot of the time there's things that plants do that we don't really understand why.
Okay.
So the Emperor Lotus mixes those. The Emperor Lotus is true neutral. It doesn't wish to harm anybody. What it does want to do is to bring everything to utter peace, right? And so it doesn't like it doesn't like its environment to change. So basically, it wants anything that comes into the environment to stay in the environment, right? And if that thing becomes problematic, it destroys the problematic thing. But it's basically, its desire is to collect peaceful things around it in the way that it collects those wasps that protect it from damage.
And on top of that, I guess you could think that it feeds like, if I get someone to stay on top of this lotus for long enough, it's going to feed this drowner creature.
Oh yeah, and in a matter of minutes, because the symbiote that it has right there, the gripping drowner. Here, I've got the stats for it right there in the thing. So there's also a sinister purpose too, right? So it lives in a symbiotic relationship with basically the water lily Venus flytrap situation going on. And there's a note that I originally had, I can't remember if that's in the description anymore, that arcane botanists aren't really sure if these are two different plants or if they're the same plant growing from, like, different root systems. And so some of them embody, peace and tranquility and allure you to stay, while the other ones they embody chaos and violence, and they will grip you and drown you into the water and feed everything. So the whole thing with these plants, the Emperor Lotus, is that it kind of creates this little microcosm of chaos and order, balance, and peace. And so where the Emperor Lotus calms you down, entices you to stay, makes you feel like everything is okay, and really does actually make everything okay in a real way. you can't get close to that. You can't have that experience without also something else being there to introduce chaos and violence and feed on you. This is like
Oh, I
this one
love
was fun.
this.
Yeah, this one was fun because it was like if you could like turn the fountain, or if you could turn the tree of life, like whatever, you could turn some philosophical art film into a kind of comical plant monster. Would you do it? And I'm like, yes, I would. I would do that.
This one fascinates me. I love this.
Yeah, so this one is one of the ones that takes it a step beyond the plant affects your environment in combat to the plant becomes your environment in combat.
Like
So this one,
yeah.
yeah, the Emperor Lotus, Bashaba's Boon, to an extent, Lulth's Gallows. There's some of these bigger plants that the whole point is if you're facing off against this plant, you're facing off in this plant. Like the plant
Yeah.
becomes an environment that you have to navigate. So it's not just a defeat it and kill it. It's a find out how it works on the inside and get out. Like,
Well, on top of that, like this inspires me to new things. Like I want to have a villain that's growing a lily pond full of these. That's where he that's like his holding cell for people. Where like he prunes down the stalks or the assassin vines or whatever so that it's just the peacifying effect that he can hold people and they're not even going to try to escape.
Yep.
Like something like that. Or perhaps like there's someone that's like growing these in the water of the town wells so that like people will be complacent. Like
That
this
is
gives
perfect.
me a lot of ideas. I love this.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want. That's exactly the kind of like, again, like I don't want to just create monsters that give people something to plug into I need something that will run up and hit my characters. I want to give people monsters that say, ooh, and then we encountered this thing. And maybe the plant isn't even the thing that makes the encounter so memorable. It might be the villain that's using the plant. It might be what happens, when you're at the plants, you're actually to go harvest the plant and then what happens there. But I want the plant to be able to affect the environment and the way that the game goes in such a way that it opens up those possibilities for the players and the DM and everybody to be like, oh, this is cool. This is different. Like, I've never
I'm
had to
working
do
on a
this.
druid right now that is using the Circle of Fire, Circle of Wildfire, Unearthed Arcana, that is a bioterrorist druid. And like
that's
this
awesome.
is going in that character.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Your character should be carrying seeds of this thing, looking for a place to plant them.
Yeah. I love it. All right. We've looked at a few creatures now. If you guys saw any more that you want us to look at more carefully, please just ask and we'll do so. But I want to talk a little more about, and we're way over time. We're going to end up at 3 hours. But let's talk about, we mentioned
on the second half, and then only be a half hour over.
Yeah, someone asked why this is on or is this on Patreon and DM's Guild? Ruben, please explain why this is not on DM's Guild.
So this is the part where I want to like live broadcast this across like all radio frequencies in the United States. Like truckers are hearing this; it's showing up on people's TVs. It is hard and challenging to figure out how to get your content out there. Especially when you're trying to do so. Like, there are venues, things like Etsy and things like Patreon to an extent. There are venues that are created to make it easier and feasible for you to do like a business, to create a business and to sell your products, things that you're making. But when it comes to like introducing creative content to a community and getting visibility and getting traction, like the world of online, like online crafting and publicity is like so disorienting. And in D&D right here, I basically had 3 options. So we had started, my housemate and I had started with a WordPress blog. And that was really just starting as a place for us to publish information, advice, and like kind of a live journal, our learning experience with D&D, with DMing, leading games, creating stuff like that. And that was not supposed to be like content creation as much as it was just sharing our learning process as it happened.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of free blogging platforms, and blogs work the way that blogs work. Like you can publish. There's some really good ones. Goodberry Monthly is a really fun creative. Let me actually look that up and put that in.
I got it. Keep talking.
Yeah, Goodberry Monthly on Blogspot is a fantastic example of a blog format that shows a blog format where somebody's creating D&D content. They're doing a lot of one-off stuff. There's some more invested campaigns and stuff that they're publishing on there, but it's just a regular update. This is what I'm thinking about. They cross-reference to a lot of other blogs. They get a lot of traffic. They get a lot of traction. You see a lot of cool stuff there. That's less structured, and there are fewer options within the format itself for producing content. So you can't publish a PDF on a blog spot. You can link, you can make a downloadable file or an external link to a place where you can download a PDF. But if your goal is to make if your goal is to make PDFs, downloadable campaigns, modules, one-shots, monsters, stuff like that, stuff that you can copy and paste into another document. Just the formatting is more complicated if you're talking about a text blog where you're basically doing that. So that's where you get into Patreon, DM's Guild, Etsy, stuff like that. Etsy is not a good place to do PDFs. Etsy is for
physical things.
Yeah, Etsy is for crafted items. You can sell books and things. You can sell digital stuff through Etsy, like download links, but don't go to Etsy for that. But Instagram, social media, Facebook, Instagram, blogging, those are good for cultivating a presence of following, updates, and stuff like that. But when it comes to actually producing content, Patreon is a cool place. DM's Guild is a cool place. And once you've found your place, for me, it was Patreon or DM's Guild. Then you get into the questions of legality and publishing rights.
Yeah. So let me tell a little bit of a thing on here. And I'm using this example because it's a popular person. Most people who are into tabletop gaming, whether you're a fan or not, have heard of Critical Role. Matt Mercer and his friends, Sam Riegel, Liam O'Brien, Laura Bailey, so on and so forth, get together every Thursday. They're off right now because of the great grounding.
Yes.
I hope to have them back soon. I am jonesing for more Critical Role. But if you're not, I get it. But Matthew Mercer has recently taken the leap. I say recently, in the past few years, has taken the leap into game designing as well as being like a quote-unquote professional GM. That started with some posts on DM's Guild, which I'm going to show some DM's Guild real quick.
Yeah, do it. So while you show that,
yeah,
you dig that up.
On DM's Guild, when you go here, you get a large catalog of all sorts of stuff you can purchase, and some of it's pay what you want, some of it's just free.
A lot of it's pay what you want or free.
And here's the thing that I'm talking about. I purchased, and I actually spent some, so it suggests a price. If you can pay, please do. Like, these people are out here doing a lot. If you can't, most people I know are okay with that. If you can't and you just want it, that's also fine. But if you can't afford it, throw them a few bucks. This is Matthew Mercer's Blood Hunter class, which I think is it needs a little more playtesting, but it's right up there with all of the official 5e classes and being perfectly balanced, not perfectly balanced, but being well enough balanced to be official and being interesting.
Yeah,
it's a really cool class that draws from things like The Witcher, and it's not one that I hear talked about very often, but it draws heavily from the Dragon Age franchise with the Grey Wardens. That's one of the first ones that comes to my mind personally, and it's just a really cool class. Now, a couple years after publishing this on the DM's Guild, along with an update of the Gunslinger subclass from 3.5 and Pathfinder that he made for his player Taliesin Jaffe and his character Percival Frederickstein Kowalski von Musel de Rollo III.
The names in Critical Role are like always
just Taliesin.
Yeah.
But anyways, so those are two subclass, a class and a subclass that Matt put on DM's Guild first. They've done very well on there. As you can see, they use a medal system on DM's Guild. Matt has adamantine status. This is a very popular, very successful DM's Guild publication.
Yeah.
Matt printed the Taldore campaign setting guide, which I actually have a copy of. If I can't find it very quickly, I'm just going to forget it. But let's see if I have it right here ready. No, I don't. So we're just going to forget that for the moment. Yes, I do. So this is actually a third-party book. This is not Wizards of the Coast, I'll say that. The Taldore campaign setting guide. It has the critical role characters on the front. It's actually a really fantastic book and a great example of how to write a campaign setting. I actually really like this book. If you open it, it has some subclasses in it. It has some monstrous races in it. It has a lot
And
of...
this is everything that Mercer has made. This is Mercer's book, so it has his content.
And to be fair, or just to make sure we're fair about it, it's not just Matthew Mercer. He had some guest writers help him with this. So he didn't come up with everything on his own.
Right.
But,
with reference to the class here. Yeah.
Yeah, it was published by Green Ronin Publishing. Well, let's just make sure we credit everyone that should be credited.
Yeah.
Joseph Carricker and Steve Kenson and James Hake also came up with content. James Hake streams on Twitch. He's very good. He's very British. But it's got some class options. It has a blood domain for the cleric. That's really interesting. It's got the Rune Child Sorcerer, which I love the Rune Child Sorcerer. It's so cool. But you will notice pretty quickly that it does not have Mercer's Blood Hunter class, and it does not have the Gunslinger subclass for the fighter. And if you look in the book, it literally says in the book why that is the case. Because Matt doesn't have the rights to put it in this book.
Right.
Because it's published on DM's Guild.
So,
Once you publish stuff on the DM's Guild, as great as it is, you lose some of your own digital rights management rights to your own stuff.
It's the legal difference between a copyright and a publishing right. And so the DM's Guild is where you want to publish content if you are trying to get if you're trying to get reach, like publicity, if you're trying to get it out to as many different people as possible, if you want to make money off of your creation, because even if you're doing a pay what you want system, the DM's Guild you just have so much more exposure, and you have a specialized kind of group that you're targeting. You're not just hoping that somebody happens across your Patreon page or follows a link and it's like, people go to the DM's Guild for 5th edition and earlier edition D&D based content. So they're going there, they're looking intentionally for stuff that they can buy. The problem is that the publishing, anything that's published on DM's Guild, the DM's Guild, which is Wizards of the Coast, now has publishing rights through DM's Guild for that material. And what that means is they can't just publish they can't just publish your content. You're still the copyright owner, so they can't, take your monsters, your campaign and sell it in a book of their own. But you can't publish it anywhere else. It's like a record deal. You can't publish it anywhere else. So I actually wasn't super clear about this. So I got in touch with the DM's Guild, the help desk, right? And I asked a question that got a bit specific. It got a bit technical with the legal terms of it. And so I ended up, where is it? I ended up in a conversation it was just one conversation with Lisa, what's her name? Here it is. Lisa Penrose, who's one of the content creators and editors, right? Or executives at Wizards of the Coast, right? And she kind of overlooks the community engagement aspect of content creation, which is DM's Guild, engaging other people. And so basically, I asked her, what exactly are the restrictions? And what it boils down to is they have platform exclusive rights to any content that you put there, which means that if you want to go back and edit your content, you can,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't take down the previous editions. You have to specify which edition. And then if you do have something on there, you can't then put it somewhere else on another publishing platform.
Yep.
And so for me, that's why I went on to Patreon with the first stages of the Herbarium, because the Herbarium in its finished form absolutely seems like something that would belong on the DM's Guild, where
Mm-hmm.
anybody can go download a book of cool plant monsters and play their way along. But I don't know if I want to put that into a campaign, right? I don't know if I want to go back and revise things.
Yeah.
I'm still creating, and I want the freedom. Patreon does not have that kind of restriction.
Mm-hmm.
Patreon doesn't have the viewer exclusivity, right? And it doesn't have the scope. It doesn't have the reach. It doesn't have the same kind of advertising, and it doesn't have the same kind of resources available to you. Because on the DM Guild, you can publish things that are kind of off limits to publishing your own
Instant audience if you use DM's Guild to a certain extent. And I want to be clear, I'm not necessarily wanting to shit on DM's Guild. It
No,
has
it's
a
great.
place. It
It's
is
great.
great. But be aware before you put things on DM's Guild how far you want to take that thing. And how
Right.
much of that thing are you willing to give up as far as distribution goes.
Right, because it's so like DM's Guild is the ideal place for players and DMs. That's why it's called DM's Guild. For content creators, it offers opportunities that nowhere else online does. In particular, what's really interesting to me is DM's Guild is where Wizards of the Coast looks for new content creators.
Yes.
Like they go on to DM's Guild and they look at popular homebrew content creation to see who they want to recruit for content creators for future editions, things like that.
And
So
if
like,
you apply for a job there, they will often, if you want to be a content writer, they
yeah.
will look at your history on there to see how well you've done and to look at the content you've published on there.
Yeah.
I don't know
So
that's
like,
what you said, but just to clear up.
Yeah, in terms of like possibilities, DM's Guild is really high. In terms of your own control over how you use the stuff you create, DM's Guild is on the lower end of things. And they're not tyrannical. It's not like they have copyright rights and publishing rights and you can't change anything. It's just a simple fact of, if you publish it on DM's Guild, it's
That's
no
where
longer
it is.
right. You can't use that in your own content outside. You can't publish that outside. You can make it and you can give it away.
It's
but
like
you
if I'm a
can't.
video game designer. This has been a big thing recently. Epic signed our deal with Gearbox that for a while it looked like the Borderlands franchise in video games was only going to be on the Epic Game Store and not on Steam or anything like that. It's like you're signing an exclusivity deal.
Right. Yeah, you are. It's what she said in like Lisa Penrose's specific words were, it's platform exclusivity. So content published on our platform must be exclusive to the platform. Content cannot be published elsewhere. Artwork is different. So you retain publishing rights to your own artwork, but text content that refers to monster stats, campaign descriptions, character descriptions, mechanics, and things like that. Anything that's in a text or a table, it's content exclusivity to DM's Guild. So
now maybe you can tell me, if I take something off of DM's Guild, does that still
yes
pertain? Okay.
Yeah, it still pertains. Anything that has been published on DM's Guild. So you can't technically take things off of DM's Guild. You can, I think that you can make them not for sale, but you can't take stuff off. And so you can't, because if it ever has been published through DM's Guild and there have ever been any purchases or publications of it on DM's Guild, then you can't use it anywhere else. So it's the kind of place where you want to send finished products that you're proud of, that you don't anticipate incorporating into other products that you might want to retain control over.
So personally for me, that gives me pause about putting things on there. Some things I'm perfectly happy to put on there. But like there's a campaign setting I'm working on that I actually want to do something with eventually, maybe. That would nothing that I think would go on there would go on DM's Guild right now, the way it stands. And this has always been weird to me because Wizards is so big, and like they can afford to loosen their grip on the
They
IP.
can. That goes into the history of Wizards. Like D&D almost didn't happen because Gary Gygax was a terrible business manager. So like we kind of culturally recognize Gary Gygax as being the driving force that made D&D into a cultural phenomenon, not
Mm-hmm.
just a game. So there were different people that were involved in the creation of D&D as a game. But it was Gygax who kind of spearheaded TSR, right? Of making a publishing company and then pushing to like get D&D produced as a game.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that even though he was the muscle behind getting D&D into stores and into the public eye, he brought the company crashing down around him. He alienated his creative staff. He had no idea what to do with management or marketing or anything like that. And Wizards was the company that came in and saved TSR and by extension D&D. They came in and they were like, we need to run a tighter ship here. And so early on, when Wizards got a hold of D&D, like D&D was a cultural phenomenon, but it was about to fall apart and it didn't have the strength that it now does. Now D&D and Wizards, I mean, like Wizards has Magic the Gathering, they have 5th edition, like nobody can hurt Wizards anymore.
No.
Wizards is the ancient gold dragon of the game of like the tabletop gaming world.
Mm-hmm.
But they're still acting
Yeah.
like it's funny. Wizards treats their content as if they are as vulnerable as the people that they're publishing the content of, like
Yeah.
on DMs,
I
which is
think it's getting better.
it is. It is.
Um, Baldur's Gate 3 is being made by a smaller publisher.
Yes.
I forget their name right now. They're so good, and I feel bad that but they made Divinity: Original Sin. I always want to say Leica, but I know that's a completely different studio that I love. Also, but the studio that's making them is a small studio in like Eastern Europe that's just known for making really good RPGs, and they got the
Oh,
rights to make Baldur's Gate 3.
yeah.
Larian, that's it, not Leica, Larian. Thank you,
Larian.
Jada. But that to me was a good opening point, and the fact that Matthew Mercer was able to get in and make a published Wildmount book, the second part of their online stream, the campaign setting for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they're hyper popular, but I am, and I'll preface this by saying I'm hyper against gatekeeping
Right.
in this community. And while I get that Critical Role is not everyone's bag, um, the people that like it are legitimate parts of this tabletop community.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that like that was recognized is like, of course, it makes business sense too. Like it's an obvious choice financially to be like, oh, there's like 1 billion fans for this thing. We should let Matt Mercer make a book. But like to say that he had little to no vetting and came in as the like lead designer on a full official publication says something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Chris Perkins is a big part of it. And I don't want to talk too much about Critical Role. They actually don't meet the standards of what I'm considering smaller independent creators for this channel. Like they're a little too big for me to want to talk about them here, for the most part. But they have a great show, Between the Sheets, and Brian W. Foster, one of their cast members, did an interview with Chris Perkins, the creative director of Dungeons and Dragons at Wizards of the Coast, and he explained that like he got his start submitting things to Dragon Magazine. Whether it was adventures or stat blocks, he was making indie content and sending it in for publication to what used to be a regularly published magazine of D&D content for AD&D. And that's awesome. And he talked about like he loved that like he got legitimate, honest feedback, and that he tries. And from what I've researched, I haven't been able to 100% say it, but it seems like he does the same. From what I've seen, Chris Perkins is good about if you send something in to Wizards with the intention of wanting it published, it, it may be hard to get it published, but someone there, whether it's Chris at the top or one of the people that he trusts to be involved, is going to send you some feedback.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's a big step in the right direction.
Yeah. And I was surprised that it was Lisa Penrose that got back in touch with me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was expecting this to be a corporate, um,
Bot or something.
just like, yeah, like it was a fill in the blank, like when you call the IRS because you don't understand your taxes and then you get somebody on after, holding for 2 hours, you get somebody who only knows how to answer questions off of a checklist and doesn't
Yeah.
actually understand tax codes. I thought it was going to be that. Like I thought it was going to be bureaucratic and frustrating, and it wasn't. Like it was personal, it
Mm-hmm.
was enlightening, it was helpful, and it was directly from the top.
Yeah.
And so it was good. Like so, in that way, I do think that DM's Guild was really good. It's just DM's Guild is a place for finished products that you want to release, you want to let go of,
This
and
also, yeah,
that's
perhaps what is better for people then, DM's Guild has a sister site called Drive Through RPG.
yeah.
And I'm not super familiar with the differences. I was under the impression that they're almost the same site. But now that I think about it, and I can't confirm this, I'm talking off the top of my head right now. Last week we talked about Zweihander. Zweihander has its own publishing house, Zweihander RPG, powered by the Zweihander system. They release paperback copies and hardback copies via Amazon. They are also on drive-throughs, so maybe that's a better option for some people.
Yeah, and there are self-publishing is always an option, and like it's usually a good option, especially if you can get traction and you can get your own fan base and community
Mm-hmm.
oriented around what you're doing. For me right now, because that's something that's like a step higher than I'm willing to try and bite
Mm-hmm.
off. That's something that I'm not really worrying about. So Patreon has been good for me because it's some place that has the tools that I need to publish the kind of content that I want on the schedule that I want, and it allows me total creative and publishing control over that.
Mm-hmm.
When the Herbarium project gets moves on and it starts taking shape as like an actual monster manual, that's when you're going to see me wanting to like try to gain traction and get playtesters and get people who are interested in buying it or using it or picking it up for free. And that's more in that world of like, can I find more people to look at it? Because right now my priority isn't getting traction, it is sticking with my original concepts.
Mm-hmm. We're not
Not
at that point yet.
right, yeah, not at that point yet.
When you get there, how can people reach you if they want to playtest some of this material?
The Patreon's a good place. The Patreon, you can send messages through that. I think that my like more personal contact information is actually available on the Patreon. If it's not, I will give my. Well, I'm trying to think. I have two emails. Um, I'll just do this here.
And then you're also active on Facebook with it. There is a Rook and the Fox Facebook account, if I
There's not.
remember.
There's not a Look
Oh,
in the Flame Facebook page. There might be in the future. Right now, I'm just sharing personal stuff.
it was the
I'm
Rookery
my
that used
personal
to
account. Yeah.
exist.
The Rookery has been down for a while. It still exists. I need to reactivate it, and I've been considering reactivating it for the Herbarium project
Mm-hmm.
and just totally overhauling that. So I might do that in the future. But again, that's kind of more stage two of
Yeah,
like of getting it out there once I've actually created a
yeah.
core body of material. So
At the height of your ambition, do you see a printed version of this?
I would like that because I like print books and I like the idea of this actually being like a journal, a field journal.
To
I
that
would
end,
enjoy that.
yeah,
It's the kind
I've
of thing I would
seen,
like to
yeah,
buy, so it's the kind of thing I would want to
yeah.
make. Yeah,
To that end, I've seen your artwork. You love things like aged paper and things like
yeah.
that. Would this be an art piece if you publish it in a book, or would it be more like this?
I would want to split that difference. I wouldn't want to publish this in like a super glossy, high value paper edition that costs like $60 for a 100-page book, and you can only buy and it's in leather hand engraved. I don't want to. I don't want to go down that road of like it's actually a game prop. It's an artifact from the game. No. But I also don't want to just publish it as a printed black and white PDF. Like if I
Okay.
did get to the point of publishing, I would hope that it was cool but also not
Yeah.
like inhibitively expensive or anything.
This reminds me way back when we were playing Magic at the Looking Glass in Martin, Tennessee. You made
Yeah.
some playmat designs that the store had printed.
Hmm.
And I should share that artwork some on Twitter. I'll share it on Twitter because
Yeah, do that.
I have some of the original prints. I
Yeah.
have I don't know if I should have this. I might just send this back to you because I don't think I gave you anything for it. Thank you, DC fan 1315, for joining us. But yeah, I have a necromancer manual from you, or it's a page from a necromancer's journal that you
Yeah.
did and then aged the paper, and it's
Oh
really
yeah, yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
Um,
that was fun, and that is the aesthetic that I would want to go for with the herbarium, just
mhm.
because it it hits that note of immersive without being overwhelming. So like there's the overwhelmingly immersive where somebody's like it's handwritten in Elvish, and that's super cool, but that's not accessible. I want this to be something people can use to make their games better. Um, but yeah, I don't want it to. But I also want it to be immersive. I want it to look like a field
Okay.
journal. I just don't want it to be like
Mhm.
handwritten in Elvish.
Yeah. Is there anywhere else we can find you, Ruben?
You can find me on Facebook. You can find me. Well, I don't really publish D&D. I don't publish this kind of content on Instagram or anything like that. I do have a creepy Etsy shop on Instagram, or a creepy. Let's see. I'll do this. This is the.
If you want, I can share it later.
Yeah, this is. Whoops, didn't get that right.
Anything that's mentioned on the stream that we don't share in the chat, and even some of the things that are in the chat, I will tweet later on. So if you look
Yeah.
down below, you can see my Twitter handle, and you can just click on it. It'll take you straight to Twitter. Follow me there, and I'll be happy to share some of this information.
Yeah, so there's the Patreon. There's the Instagram isn't this content. It's similar and related content, but it's actually where I make like artifacts
Yeah.
for this is my craft
I
closet.
remember this stuff. You were doing a
Yeah,
lot of this for a while.
yeah, I did. I
Um,
ran a booth last summer. I ran it at the Geek Craft Expo, a convention here in St. Louis. So I oh that just completely obscured what that was. Um,
I saw it said head of imp.
Yeah, it's head of imp. But yeah, I haven't made a lot of that just because of recent events.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm in my craft closet, so I've got
Um,
and bottles and stuff in
yeah.
here. But
My next question, I suppose, is when you are done, when can I expect a monster cookbook from you? Because that's the next We talked about it a little bit that I want to be able to scavenge more things from monster parts. I think you are the perfect person to bring us the first
yes,
monster part cookbook
yes, yes,
that is
absolutely.
5e compatible.
Yeah, that
Um,
would be okay. But that also that like this can be like the final trail. The final tangent I take. One of the things that I envisioned the herbarium including in its finished form was that one of the things I've always liked about really old books and like manuscripts and things like that is that there's multiple generations of information in one tome. And so you have the basic information in the tome, but then you also have marginalia and you have things like
yeah.
written in the sides and in the footnotes and in the back and things added at the front and things added at the back.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I wanted to add to the Xanathar's Guide, it does a really good job of that. Xanathar's Guide feels like something that's been compiled by an eclectic madman, and it's a little bit too formal. Like it's a little bit too structured and formatted to feel like really convincingly like that. But they do a good job of adding obscure side notes and obscure marginalia and footnotes and things. And so that is something that I wanted to include in the herbarium to a greater extent. So I do want it to be mostly about the plant monsters, but I do also want things like recipes to be in the footnotes and spells. One of the things that I do when I take a break, I do 6 weeks of monsters, and then I give myself an off week to try to catch up on everything that I've gotten
Mhm.
behind on in the 6 weeks. And so in the off week, usually instead of catching up, what I do is I write spells, and
Yeah.
those have been really fun. So um,
How much would someone have to patronize you to submit a plant monster for your
that's free.
herbarium?
That's free. Tell me about ideas, and like if you tell me about ideas, I will. If you tell me about ideas, if you tell me about ideas, I will. I'll go back and forth with you on that, and you'll get
Wonderful.
credit. So some of the monsters that you see, the original concept was by somebody else,
Mhm.
and there was somebody else who was like, I want you to make a monster out of this. And so we went back and forth on it. I had a monster that they liked. And so I credit that. In the credit of the monster, you'll see a note, and it won't be like created by Ruben. It'll be created like concept by whoever,
Mhm.
stats and whatever by Ruben. So that's another thing that I believe in is collaboration. So
Okay.
yeah.
My next, I think that's a good place to end for the most part.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in if you did. Thank you for joining me, Ruben, and I hope to have you
Yeah, it
on
was super
streams in
fun.
the future. On Cover to Cover every other Saturday, so it looks like it'll be every second and fourth Saturday of the month. We're going to be on here with a new artist or game designer or someone in the tabletop community that's creating amazing things and highlighting their work and sharing their work so more people can see it. And just talking about gaming and fun things that people can do. A lot of it will be non D&D, other games that you might enjoy. I know right now is a hard time. A lot of people are stuck at home due to the great grounding, as I am calling it for algorithm reasons. Um, and it's a great time to learn new games, to have fun with friends. Check out teleconferencing options like Discord or Zoom. Be careful with Zoom. Google Hangouts, all those kind of things. Play games with friends. Keep yourself busy and just have a good time. If you have questions, I hate to call myself an expert. I'm not, but I am a teacher by trade, an English teacher, and I'd be happy to share what I know. I think that my guests all would be the same. Mark Connell from last week, Ruben from this week, the Rook and the Fox. Hopefully next week, I think we're going to have my friend Cody Jarman, who is a
Yeah.
doctoral student at the University of Texas at Austin, and we're going to talk about some of the literary roots and kind of some of the things that are happening with identity in D&D, and like some of the weird portrayals of like hags are always evil and how that's starting to break down.
Yeah.
And some of like orcs being always evil and some of the problematic connotations with that, and how we can open up our games to be more welcome to more people, which I think is also important. Thank you for joining me, Ruben. I also hope to soon start doing live play games, and Ruben will be invited to that along with many of my other guests. I want to get a Zweihander game going that'll be like 5 sessions to 8 sessions long, not super long, so we can play other games. I want to play Kids on Bikes. I want to play some D&D. I want to play some Pathfinder 2e. I recently heard about a game called Dread, where your skill checks are made by pulling a log out of a Jenga tower, and if it falls, you fail.
Yeah.
So we're gonna play some games on here too. I don't have a date or a schedule set for that yet. Right now, it's just cover to cover every other Saturday. Um, yeah, I think you'll really like that one, Jada. You'll definitely be invited, I promise. Um, but we're gonna have a lot of fun on this channel. I game as well. I'm gonna start. I think Mondays is gonna be my day to stream Pillars of Eternity, where we are playing through a Cipher class, which is like a psionics. I'm also gonna start. I was bad about it this time. I really wanted to stream something with the Unearthed Arcana psionics stuff. Even though it's a little late, I still will, and we'll start doing a stream for every UA that comes out because I think those are
That's
good to
good.
talk about.
That's good. Yeah, those are good to talk
Um,
about.
but I hope you'll join me in Zweihander, Ruben. I think
Yeah,
my game will be based heavily on Doctor Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell.
such a good book. It's so
Yeah.
good.
If you need some great inspiration for a mage, that's a fantastic Victorian novel about magic and the connotations of gentlemen practicing magic. Um, oh, it's so good. Of course, someone could kill with magic, General,
A
but a
gentleman.
gentleman would never do
Yep.
so. Yeah. But
Oh
Ruben
God.
can also be
Yeah.
reached occasionally. I don't want to invite people too much to this because you've taken commissions before, and I'm going to be commissioning you for some art soon. But if you want to pay someone for some great art, Ruben is a great
Hey,
option.
hey,
Message him through
I'll take
Patreon.
money for art. Just no terms and conditions on when you get it.
I want you to do
That's
more
it.
character art. Like I,
I want to do more character art. That's what I'm trying to like. What I want to do before stage 2 is get the technology to be able to do digital art. And once I have that, I think I'm going to jump back into character art because right now it's a pain.
mhm,
It's just such a pain to like draw it and then try to get it into a
yeah.
digital format.
All right, Ruben. So I'll be right back with you when we wrap up the stream. But I'm gonna go. But yeah, guys, thank you for joining. cover to cover. This is our second episode. Our first one, we talked about Zweihander. Next week, we'll hopefully be talking about some of the literary things and talking about Tolkien and Philip Pullman and some other great authors. But we'll get back into that soon. Join in every other Saturday. Join in weekdays for gaming, Magic the Gathering, Pillars of Eternity, all sorts of great stuff. Hit that follow button if you enjoyed the stream tonight. We're working on making it to partners, so we're almost halfway there, and then we can do even more cool stuff. I'm not necessarily trying to make a bunch of money off streaming, but it'd be cool to have the subscribe button, so you should do that. But anyways, have a great night. Thank you for tuning in. It's been a blast. See you next time. Play more games.